So today we are with Roger Nathan, a man who has achieved something in motorsport few have done. Won a top flight motorsport championship with a car bearing his own name and of his own design, as well as leading a fascinating life in motorsport outside of that and outside of motorsport altogether. Roger, thank you very much for having us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
I'm very glad to see you, Ollie.
Yeah, likewise.
It's always good to talk about the old days to people who understand it
Absolutely.
and appreciate it. That's the important thing.
No, I'm looking forward to it immensely. It's going to be fun. It seems to me, Roger, that people who are in motorsport, particularly from your era, led the most fascinating lives outside of that as well. Do you know why? Any idea why you think that is?
Well, basically, I wasn't content with an office job, sitting in the same place every day, going on the underground to central London and coming back in the evening. That was okay when I was 15 and 16. So I left school at 15. I thought I'd better leave before they throw me out, so I decided to leave. And I went to work in Hamleys, a toy shop in Regent Street. I wanted to go into the model aircraft department, but that was full, so I went to sell Hornby 00 trains instead on the first floor. And I learnt from a chap called Terry Brooks, a very good tutor. He taught me how to sell. And that was the beginning of my sort of worldly education.
Yeah. And you were very good at it, weren't you?
Yes, I was, in fact. Yeah. But after I'd been there quite a short time, I was there 18 months in total before I got bored with it. But they gave me my own counter, and that's just when Scalextrics were first introduced, by coincidence. So they gave me a stand or a counter near the first floor, just by the stairs, where everybody came up the stairs. So they'd see me straight away. And I set the Scalextrics up, and I'd demonstrate it and attract people. They'd come over and they'd buy Scalextrics. And I remember one day, I took £100, which was, in those days, for selling toys, a lot of money. And the manager, Mr. Reynolds, came down from the top floor, the 5th floor, and said to me, I understand you've taken £100 today, Mr. Nathan. I said, yes, Mr. Reynolds. He said, how did you do that? I said, by selling, Mr. Reynolds, by selling. And he sort of went, yes, and wandered off. But no, but to get back to the point, I wasn't trying to do anything, really. My education was sort of basic, but it was barely sufficient. So I wasn't in a position to get a job that required any expertise or any particular training. So when I left Hamleys after 18 months, as I got bored with it, it was all a bit petty, with the little rivalries and intrigues going on between the first floor and the second floor and the top floor and so on. This is not for me. So I went to work with my father in the car business. He had 5 branches in those days. The head office was at Leytonstone. There's one in Brixton, Clapham Park Road, which I think he gave to my brother for his 21st birthday. There's one in Streatham, another one in Ilford, and one in Dagenham. And also he had one in Wembley, which he bought because we had a Mercedes agency. That was in the late 50s. But that was where I first went when I started working with Dad. But in those days, there was a lot of anti-German feeling still around.
There would be. And
nobody wanted to buy a Mercedes. We had the cars on sale or return from the factory, or from the company. And my Dad phoned up one day and said to Mercedes, come and get your cars, nobody wants to buy them.
Wow.
And he sold the branch. But sort of 10 years later, that agency was a license to make a lot of money.
Interesting, yeah. People have moved on a bit.
It's timing.
So, I mean, it's quite interesting then, because it wasn't long after that you got into motorsport, but I'm quite interested the way that you got started. You weren't a sort of 7-year-old looking through the fence, you know, one day dreaming that you were going to be world champion. You almost sort of fell into it a bit, didn't you?
Well, what I really liked when I was a schoolboy, sort of 7 or 8 years old, was aircraft. Because I had an uncle in Lancaster during the war, another uncle in the Air Force, and Dad was in the Army. My brother was in the Air Force. He was stationed at headquarters at Uxbridge. And I was inspired by these we used to have Nouveauté news, And it was proper news. You know, it showed you what was actually happening, not what people think and what do you think, what's your view on this and that, which is not news. It's conversation. They showed you the news. They told you in plain language what was going on, and easy to understand. I was fascinated with these jet. It was my dream, in fact, to join the Air Force and get into a jet fighter and just go straight up like a rocket. But it didn't happen. In fact, I went into the car business instead with Dad, and that sort of my ideals from that time drifted away.
But you were, was it at the age of 17? You had an Austin Healey 3000, is that right?
Well, when I was 16, my first car was a bubble car, an Isetta, BMW Isetta.
Nice.
Which, in fact, I mean, looking back, it was a load of rubbish in those days. I mean, a terrible thing. It was 3 wheels,
Yes.
and the reverse gear was blanked off. But it meant you could drive it at 16 because it was taxed as a motorcycle. It was like a sidecar combination. So we went to, Dad took me to Leighton Buzzard to Camden Motors, and he paid £350 for this brand new red Isetta BMW. And I mean, I thought it was fantastic at the time, my first car. It was wonderful. But it wasn't very good, in fact. It had some serious problems. You'd get in the rain. It had drum brakes on the front. I don't think it was a brake on the rear at all. Drum brakes on the front. And one of them would get wet. Well, they both get wet, so either it wouldn't stop at all until the brakes burnt the water off, or the one that didn't have the water would violently turn the car left or right, depending which wheel was wet. And so you never knew which way it was going to turn, and it would actually sort of go across the other side of the road. So you had to be very careful. And the other fault it had, whenever it rained, water somehow got into the fuel system. I don't quite know how it did that, but it would splutter and cough and it would clear. And top speed was 54 miles an hour on a flat road in 0 wind.
That's pretty good going.
Well,
Yeah,
I think
the car doesn't stop.
Well, I did that on all circular, checked there was no wind and a flat part, and got the true maximum speed.
Yeah, the start of the racing driver.
And obviously I became interested in cars. Anyway, I had a bubble car for a year. I did 13,000 miles in that.
Wow.
I know, that's a lot. And didn't have any accidents. And still being in the car trade, I wanted something better, of course, natural progression. And I fancied an Austin Healey 3000. A used one came along with, I think it had done 8,000 miles. It was in an ivory colour. Very nice car, perfectly standard car. And it had an overdrive switch on the right-hand side of the dashboard, electric overdrive, so you could flick the overdrive off and on if you wanted a higher gear. And that would work, I think, in top gear. And I was standing on the front in the Leytonstone branch, talking to one of the salesmen his name was Douglas Powell. And in his earlier years, he raced an MG. And he suddenly said to me, during conversation, "Why don't you race your Healey?" So I said, "Well, I don't know." I said, "Never thought about that." I said, "What do I have to do to race?" He said, "Well, apply to the RAC for a license, a competitions license, and then join one of the clubs, the racing clubs. There were 3 or 4, several at the time, BRSCC, the BARC, which I did, and applied for a race. And he said, when you're accepted, I'll take you down and I'll come along with you and show you the ropes."
And had you actually been to a race meeting?
No, I've never been to a race meeting, no.
So your first race meeting was your first ever event?
Yes.
Yes.
I've been to the dog tracks with Dad. That brought me to tears. There used to be one at Hendon, because Dad was a gambler. He gambled on dogs and horses, particularly in the casinos in the West End.
Yeah, it was big back then as well.
Oh,
wasn't
well,
it?
he was a big gambler.
Businessman, my granddad, businessman, very much the same. Gambling lifestyle.
Yeah,
Business, you're gambling all the time.
He was a very big gambler. I think he lost a lot. We never knew how much, but we think he lost a lot of money gambling. I mean, you can't win, really.
No, you never hear the full truth of the gamblers, do you?
And they don't want people to know. They're too ashamed if they lost a lot of money. Anyway, so I applied for meeting at Brands Hatch on the 5th of March 1961, and the only concession I made to the car, because it was a perfectly standard car, an SU carburetors, I went to Dunlop's and bought a set of racing tyres. In those days they had a branch in Albany Street, just off the Euston Road. And on the top floor there, it was like a big garage. On the top floor there was a racing division. And I bought, the tyres were £20 each, and I got a 50% discount. So a tenner a tyre, put the 4 racing tyres on, had a big badge bar across the front with AA and RAC on it and the racing club badges, a long radio aerial, 2 big spotlights. Typical boy racer.
Yeah, brilliant.
Although I didn't drive very fast on the roads. I mean, I drove when I was sort of 17, 18, just to learn. I drove quite quickly, but I never sort of did ridiculous things or outrageous things on the road. I always had a sense of proportion.
Yeah, this is what's quite interesting, because you weren't chasing the motorsport dream
not
from
at
a
all.
young age.
No.
And it's interesting reading your book. You know, when you said you went out there on your first race, and the lines that you were taking, because you hadn't experienced racing, so.
Well, no, I didn't know nothing about it. I didn't know anything about lines. I didn't know about sort of single and double carburetors, and 4-branch exhaust pipes, and adjustable shock absorbers. I just no idea at all. I went out to practice, and I had this idea that, which I thought was a good idea, which it wasn't, it was ridiculous, but at the time it was good. Take the tight inside line on the circuit, rather like a running track. So I'll cover less distance and go faster. So I was belting down the straight, braking for the corner, then hugging a tight inside line right around the corners. It was a bit odd.
Yeah.
And
humble beginnings.
Oh, very humble.
Before
I had no idea at all,
Yes.
none whatsoever. And then I thought, well, it may be better if I can use the overdrive and not change gear going into paddock. It'll save some time. So I had the thing in overdrive down the straight, and I flicked it out of overdrive, going to paddock, and got it all wrong, because the speeds were all wrong. I was going too fast, and I should have been in a lower gear. I lost control at paddock, which in those days it had no runoff at all.
Yeah.
It was just there was a small bit of grass on the side, about 2 feet wide, and then you got this solid earth bank, and you go around there sort of, I suppose, in the Healy about 70 miles an hour. So if you came up and hit that bank, you were going to write the car off for sure.
Yeah.
But luckily, it spun, and I slid all the way down Paddock Hill sideways. It stopped at the bottom and didn't actually spin round.
Didn't get collected along the way.
No, and the thing that annoyed me more was I had a visor on the helmet, which was open underneath. It was a Perspex visor. It's sort of like a balloon-shaped thing, and a lot of sort of grit went in my eyes, and I think it was the burning of the rubber was being scrubbed off the tyres. It was somehow getting into my eyes.
Brand new tyres.
Oh, I don't like this at all. Anyway, and we started the event, the actual race itself, and I found to my surprise I finished up second.
Wow.
Oh, no, sorry, I've left a bit out here. An important point. After practice, the track manager came over to talk to me. I can't remember his name now, unfortunately. Nice fellow. And he said, "Do you mind if I tell you something, son?" I said, "No, I thought I'd done something wrong." And he said, "Come over here with me, I want to show you something." And we walked to the stand at Paddock Bend, and we got on there, and he said, "I want you to watch these 3 or 4 cars coming down the straight, and particularly the third car. Watch the way it goes around Druid's Corner, the hairpin at the top, because you can see everything at Brands from the Paddock Bend." And I saw the car went over on the left-hand side of the track to take the right-hand bend, and cut the corner, and drifted out to the outside of the track to try and straighten the line up as much as possible. And he said, "That's the line you have to adopt if you want to go anywhere motor racing." I said, "I see." I said, "Well, thank you very much. That was very helpful." And that's helped me, and I managed to finish up second.
Yeah, clearly a natural then. Yeah. Quite a development from.
Well, yeah. But I must admit, I mean, it was only a very minor meeting. There were no big names involved, but people, I suppose, similar to me. But I was actually the youngest driver in racing in those days.
Oh yeah,
I was just 17 years old.
Yeah, he's incredibly young in that period. Yeah.
Most of the drivers were in their late 20s and 30s, even 40s.
So you think of Fangio, etc.
Well, he didn't start till he was about 39, did he?
Yeah, staggering, staggering. Yeah.
But I was the youngest, and I came back in the paddock and after the event and looking round, and I saw this other car, all sorts of. There was Morgan's MGBs, and there were other Austin Healey's, and one particular car caught my attention, which was a Lotus Elite. It had just come out then, I think, not long before. And I didn't even know what a Lotus was. I thought it was some sort of oriental flower. I didn't know it was a Lotus car. That's how little I knew about cars.
Yes.
Anyway, and I got chatting to some of the teams, and they said, "Well, that's the car you need for motor racing. That Healey's too heavy. It's a rally car." And I said that's because it was a handful, and there was no power steering on it. It was quite a tank to throw around the circuit.
Yeah, of course, the Elite, very innovative car with monocoque, fiberglass, Chapman struts, all that.
Oh, it was a different category entirely. I mean, the weight was probably half the weight of the Healey.
Yeah, staggering.
Big difference. And much stiffer too, the monocoque construction. Although I wouldn't have known that at the time. I wouldn't know what a monocoque was. And so, on the basis of this information, we sold the Healey and bought the Lotus Elite from Taylor Crawley in South Audley Street.
Was it about £3,000 or something?
No, it was. I think we paid. I think it was £1,900.
Plenty back then, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a lot of money then, yeah. I mean, you almost get a small flat for that.
Really? Wow, this puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Certainly a down payment at least. Anyway, so I bought this Elite and took it to an event, and I found that the other Elites were much faster than me on the straight and round the corners. And I came back in the paddock and I went to see, I think it was Ron Bennett who ran the Team Elites. They were white with a green stripe on. Beautifully prepared cars. He's a great mechanic, Ron Bennett. And I said to him, your car seemed a lot faster than mine. I said, he said, what engine have you got? I said, well, obviously it's, no, he said, what stage of modification is it? We know it's the same engine. I said, well, I don't know. I said, it's just how I bought the car. From the factory specification. He said, well, that's no good. He said, you need to modify it. I said, well, in what way? He said, well, you need to, first of all, throw the old SU carburetor away and get twin Webers on there. I didn't know what a Weber was. And then he said, you need a 4-branch exhaust system. I knew what that was. Wasn't totally ignorant. 4-branch exhaust system without a silencer. And you need to get some racing tyres on there. And some adjustable shock absorbers. You need to change the camshaft. You need to change the timing gear from fibre to steel. And this was like another language for me.
Yes.
Oh dear.
Take the whole thing apart, basically.
Well, yeah, I'll start again.
Start again, yeah.
On the engine, mainly, not so much on the chassis. And the other option, of course, was a ZF gearbox. But that wasn't essential. The standard car had an MGA gearbox.
MGA, yeah.
MGA. Which was fine. So I said to Dad, I said, we can't win with this car, Dad. I said, it's, we've got all this work to it. And I told him what I remember being told by Ron Bennett. And he said, well, we have to do something about it then, because there's no point racing if you can't do well. And somehow, Willie Griffiths, we contacted somebody called Willie Griffiths, who at that time had a racing car garage in just off Sloane Square. A small sort of lock-up unit with a sort of a shop front. Because in those days, you could actually afford the rents in the West End in those days. I mean, to have a racing car shop there now.
Yeah.
I mean,
forget it.
Well, you wouldn't get permission.
Yeah, for a start.
Let alone be able to afford the rent. And went to see Willie, a Yorkshireman, and he used to work for Lotus. And he, in fact, was Graham Hill's mechanic on the F1 Lotus. And he left Lotus and set up business on his own. Nice fellow, Yorkshireman, and we chatted, and he said, "You can do the work." Okay, fine. And we gave him the car, and I think a month or so later it was ready, and I applied for a race at Aintree. Got the car from Willie, and he said that when you start the car, he said with the Webers, there's no choke. Well, there was choke, but we didn't use them because choke was for road cars, so the choke wasn't connected. So what you do, you pump the throttle a few times, and then you can start it. It acts like a choke.
Yeah.
I said, fine, okay. And as soon as I jumped in the car, because it wasn't on the trailer in those days, we just drove it through the streets.
Brilliant.
Because it was a road car as well. And I thought, what a difference! And, this is a huge difference. It was an amazing difference in performance. Sure. I mean, you could feel it straight away from first gear.
Yeah.
And anyway, he said, before you go to, he said, you need to run it in a bit. So I thought, oh, well, we haven't got too much time now. The race is the weekend, we've only got a few days. He said, well, I said, I'll drive it to Aintree. I think there was a motorway in those days, but not much of it. The M1 had just been built.
Right.
And so I drove this car all the way to Aintree. And went through the mysteries of scrutineering. And they applied numbers to the car. And out I went to race it. And it didn't seem, compared to the other elite, it was still very slow. I was being passed on the straight. I thought, well, this is no good, something must be wrong. And we finished the race, took it back to London, took it back to Willie. I said, Willie, there's something wrong with this. I said, I told him what happened in the race, being passed. I said, there must be something wrong with the engine. He said, well, let me have a look at it. He came outside, he opened the bonnet, and he's revving the throttles. And the next thing I knew, he's taking the plugs out, and it's got one plug, which is fouled up. He said, well, it's on 3 cylinders.
Did the whole race on 3 cylinders?
Yeah, so but he did tell me not to overpump the throttle. So what I must have done before I went up the M1 up to Liverpool, is pump it too much, and I went up a plug immediately, which didn't clear.
Yeah.
So I drove all the way to Liverpool, to Aintree, on 3 cylinders and back without knowing it.
It's absolutely brilliant. As I say, humble beginnings. Obviously went on and did amazing things after.
So when he went in and cleaned the plug on the old Champion plug machine, you had to put it in a rubber hole and give it a sandblasting and cleaned it off after, put it back and started up, and it was a different engine entirely. I mean, a huge difference. And from there, I began to get 1 or 2 thirds. I think in that first season with the elite, I think I had 1 win, probably a couple of seconds. But I was learning. Yeah. And you can't learn this sort of overnight. And apart from the physical learning, you got to think mentally too. If you're going to come out and you go into a corner and you think you're dicing with somebody, your natural reaction is to push the brakes, slow down. But if you're going to think about safety or accidents, you're not going to win. You can't do it. You've got to put that completely out of your mind. And once you start worrying about your safety, or if you're going to come off, you're not going to. The other guy's going to go in front. He'll just pass you by. You'll brake too soon and be passed. So you have to get the right mental attitude too. Very important.
Sure, it takes years to learn as well.
When you're 17, you learn those things quickly. I mean, it wasn't a problem actually.
Yeah.
Not that I thought of it very much, but people say, well, aren't you afraid? And I said, well, no, I'm not afraid. No, and I wasn't. And once I began to win and get more confident, I was totally unconcerned. Never gave safety a thought.
No, safety wasn't given a lot of thought back in those days.
Well, we didn't have seat belts, no rollover bars. We had open face helmets, and if you look at the Formula Junior cars in those days, you got the head sticking way above the car. So
fuel tank straddling you in the seat. It's just
that's what I had in a later car.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in one of my early days at Snetterton, Stirling Moss was entered in the Formula 1 race. And I thought, I must see how this man drives. So I was keen to learn more.
Sure.
And nobody was teaching me. This is all self-taught, but actually doing it. So I walked up the inside of the track, which you could do in those days because nobody would stop you. went across the circuit and sat on the bank at Rich's Corner, which is the first bend after the straight at Snetterton. And I waited for Sterling Ross to come around. And I saw him coming down the straight, and he was sitting sort of laid well back, arms straight like that, head up, looking over the top. And he was going like that with the wheel, and the car was twitching, and he was catching it, accelerating to hold the slide. I thought, that's interesting. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm sort of going around like I'm on railway lines, so I'm obviously not going around quick enough. So I learned quite a lot just by watching Sterling Moss on that one bend.
Sure, the four-wheel drift.
Yeah, and the way he caught it on the steering.
On the steering, yeah.
But then, in the second year in the elite, I began to get quite quick, and I was winning quite regularly. And that's when I was up against people like Les Leston, and Graham Warner in LOV1.
Yeah.
Because your father's car was DAD10, Daddy-O.
Yes, that's right.
Red and white. And Graham's car was white and black. And coming down the straight at Snetterton, I thought I was going quite quick. Came round the track and coming past the pits, pulled over to the left to take the right-hand bend, braked. As I was braking, I saw this white elite flash by me, still accelerating. And then he went into the corner, started to drift, and then the driver put his hand out and waved to me. So I thought,
almost an insult. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I thought I was going quick. But obviously I wasn't. That was Graham Warner.
Mm. Yeah, he was very good, Graham.
He was very, very quick, Graham, yeah. I think he was an ex-RAF fighter pilot, I think.
I didn't know that.
I think so.
Yeah.
And he had a sports car show in the Lotus Agency on the Edgware Road.
That's right, the checkered flag.
That's right, yeah.
Mm.
One thing I do remember, I was driving with other amateur drivers. There was another old boy called Dick Forwards, an elderly guy, well, his 40s, I suppose. And we sort of started together. He had the dark blue Elite. And he lent his car to Paul Hawkins to drive. Paul, in fact, rolled the car and badly damaged it, broke the glass and the roof was caved in. And he said, how did you do on times? I said, well, I said, Paul in your Elite was only 9 seconds faster per lap. And he said to me, only 9 seconds, that's a huge amount. You know, I was still thinking, I wasn't thinking in tenths of a second. Yeah. And I said, no, that's not that much. I said, I'll make that up sooner or later, which I did, in fact. And I think within a sort of 6 months of that time, I could keep up with Graham and Les.
Mega.
More or less on equal terms. But it's taken a couple of years. It didn't just happen.
Well, I mean, they'd both been at it quite a while by then.
They had, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, when did Les started racing in 48. So,
oh, blimey, yeah.
Yeah, 49 even. So, yeah, you've been at it quite a while. So to catch up that quickly.
12 years, 13 years of experience, yeah.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. Mm. So, of course, I mean, you went on to do great things in the Elite.
I had a crash at Brands. I remember going past the pits. This was a race with Les, and I think Graham as well. I can't remember the actual event. It was in 1962. And I remember going past the pits, and I saw my pit board, and it said P3, which meant I was third fastest. And I thought, well, this is not quick enough. I've got to do better than this. The next thing I knew, I woke up in an ambulance on the way to Dartford Emergency Ward in the hospital there.
Was it with a nurse cutting off your overalls, the classic?
Well, yes, I woke up and I said, well, she said, you said you had an accident in the motor car. Well, that's a bloody silly thing to do. And then she starts pulling down my driving suit, because we had these cotton overalls on. Mm-hmm. And I wished to have a pair of Dunlop plimp soles on, buy them £1 a pair. And no fireproof stuff, and one level of cotton overalls. There was this black lady taking down my trousers. I said, what are you doing? She said, I want to give you an anti-tetanus injection. And she started putting my... And I said, no, I just blacked out. I think that terrified me more than the accident. Anyway, and I blacked out again. And the next thing I knew, I woke up in Dartford Hospital, in the ward there, and there were all sorts of people moaning and groaning, and I thought, I can't have this. I phoned my friend, I said, come and get me. I said, on the Sunday, this was Saturday, I said, I can't stay here for long. But what actually happened, I had a bang on the head, I had a concussion. So I don't actually remember the accident to this day. But we obviously got what was left of the car, there wasn't much of it left, and looked at it. It looked like that the cause of the accident was the rear drive shaft connected to the hub with a universal joint and with the steel tube. And it looked like the weld on the steel tube to the universal joint had broken. But that also located the wheel. So once it lost its, once that shaft broke, the wheel went like that, the rear wheel, steered the car into a spin. I was doing about probably 90 miles an hour behind the pits at Brands. It hit the bank at South Bank Bend, shot up the bank, which is like a ramp, it somersaulted, and it came down upside down on top of the bank, and it broke in two. And there's a picture of that in my book, in fact.
The upturned one. Quite a famous photo. I'd seen that photo around before. I had no idea. I actually thought it was Love One originally until I spoke to you and realised actually it was your car. And
I was lucky because I had a standard seat instead of a bucket seat, and the back of the seat supported the roof. And otherwise I'd probably got a broken neck or worse.
Sure.
And your father came round. He was the next one round. Saw what happened. I thought, well, you've got to do something, which was very nice of him. He stopped the car and helped cut me out of the wreck.
Yeah, camaraderie back then,
Oh yes,
people
he stopped his practice. Yeah, he stopped his practice and give a hand.
Yeah, that's nice to hear.
Yeah. So it's another connection.
Yeah. and after that, you went into Formula Junior.
Yes, Bernie Eccleston was a friend of the family, a friend of Dad's. They were both in the motor trade together, obviously. And Bernie, I think, had raced 500 JEPs at some point. He discontinued because I think he had something wrong with his right eye. Not sure.
That rings a bell, yeah.
Anyway, and they were friends, and they'd buy and sell cars between themselves. And Bernie would sometimes come to us on a Boxing Day for sort of Christmas lunch with his first wife Ivy, and his little daughter. I can't remember her name now. And he'd come with a nice bunch of flowers, a box of chocolates. Always did things properly, Bernie.
Yeah.
A proper bunch of flowers, not sort of tatty bunch of daffodils or wilting.
Yeah, petrol station.
Nice box of chocolates. Yeah, exactly. A nice box of chocolates. And he actually came down that first race with me in the Healy.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And we went back to his house after that race. He had a house in Bromley. Went back there for tea.
Fantastic.
And I was with a friend of mine who helped me, a local lad who'd seen the car and the drive and offered his help. And it was Alvin Cohen, who actually in later life became an optometrist. He became an optician.
Right.
But he was very, very keen, very enthusiastic. And so we went back to Bernie's house for tea. And we went into the washroom or the bathroom to wash our hands and to clean up for tea. Of course, we were grubby from the car because there was no mechanics in those. So we did it ourselves, or what little we could do. And went into Bernie's house, lovely house, and it went into the bathroom, and there were these gleaming white towels hanging on chrome rails. And
everything perfect. Yeah.
Absolutely immaculate. Mm-hmm. And of course, there was only a bar of soap here. There's nothing to get the grease off. So we were washing away with this bar of soap. The grease is not coming off. We just took the towel, great big greasy hand marks, black greasy marks on these immaculate white towels.
I bet that went down well. Yeah.
And then he showed us around the house, and he had this little sort of study room. And it was painted a sort of burgundy colour, a light burgundy, plum colour. And he explained that to get the shade he wanted, he made the painter do it 6 times until he got the right shade.
A man who knew what he wanted.
He knew exactly what he wanted.
I bumped into a chap who used to work for him at Brabham, who later looked after, much later, looked after his car collection, Bernie's private car collection, and he was telling me about stories of Bernie. So he would, much like Henry Ford the First, Henry Ford used to sit in his ivory tower in his factory, and as the cars would come in, he'd make notes of all the people that would reverse into their car parking spot because they were too eager, clearly, to get away when the when the day ended. And Bernie was much the same. No one was to reverse into car parking spot because they were too eager to get away at the end of the day.
Oh, you think ahead like that. He will think ahead like
Yeah.
that. Typical. Was that fellow you say you who knew him? Was that Clive Santo?
No, I can't remember his name now. I'd only met him once in passing, but he told me that. Another one, he said, Bernie, again, efficiency. Apparently he couldn't stand sort of people with their outfits, uniform at Brabham, being untidy. So apparently he used to have the pockets sewn up so they couldn't put their hands in their pockets, and also there was no breast pocket because he didn't like the pack of fags, bulging out of the. Yeah,
That could well be. Yeah.
What were your impressions of him?
Well, in those days, I mean, Bernie was a friend of Dad's. I didn't pay too much attention really. Other than I saw the way he did things, and it was nice. It was properly done. You could tell it was a bit special. And he explained things sometimes, just in general conversation, and you think, that's a good idea. And it's very simple. Why didn't I think of that? And he just happened to think of it first. It was obvious once he explained it, but I never thought of it.
Yeah. He's just a good communicator, wasn't he?
He was ahead. He saw. To give you an idea, after we stopped racing, many years later, I was partly involved in the property business, and there was a house in Belgravia, which was owned by the Grosvenor Estates, and it was a freehold house. And then, because all those houses on the Grosvenor Estate were leasehold in those days, this was a freehold house, and apparently, back in period, the Duke of Westminster lost it in a gambling debt. That's how it became a freehold house.
Brilliant.
It was one of those places like close to Eaton Terrace, a 4 or 5 story building, Regency style house. And I thought, well, it was £180,000 freehold. And I thought, well, that was too much for me. I mean, it was a lot of money then.
Plenty, yeah.
This was in the mid-1970s, in fact.
Yeah, that's an expensive house back then.
Yeah, it's a lot more than that now. Anyway, 180,000. So I thought, well, I need a partner on this. I'll see if Bernie's interested. So I told him about the house, and he came to London, from Bixley Heath. We went to view the house together, and he walked around it quickly, looking at this and that and this and that. And he said, no, he said, this won't do. I said, well, what is it? But I said, is it the price? He said, oh, no, it's not the price, he said. He said, but it's slightly on the narrow side, and you won't be able to get a lift in it to get up to the upper floors, and therefore it won't make its money when it's converted.
You just had that.
Yeah,
He
had this foresight. I never thought of that. He'll tell you things that are obvious when he tells you, but you don't see it yourself. You're always that one step ahead.
He went on to become this sort of world-renowned figure. I mean, did that surprise you in any way?
I'll tell you what did surprise me about Bernie. In the late 70s, he used to ring up at night, about 8 o'clock, and talk to Dad, quite regularly. And I happened to answer the phone, and it was Bernie. I said, hello. I said, how are you, Bernie? He said, I'm fine. We were having a little chat, just being polite. My dad was coming downstairs to take the phone. Because he didn't have mobile phones then, obviously. It was on a wire and plugged into the... And we chatted. He said, by the way, I've just bought the Brabham racing team. This would be in 1979, I think.
Yeah, it would make sense around
I said,
that sort of
did
time.
you? I said, what did that cost? He said he paid £100,000 for it.
Blimey. That house was around the same sort of time, was it? 180 grand for that house? So to put it in perspective.
No, the house a few years earlier.
Is it? Yeah.
About 3 years in between.
Okay. But it still puts it in perspective, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, that house today, I mean, you'll probably look at something, I don't know, £15 million probably.
Oh, wow, okay. Yeah, not insignificant then. Yeah. Well.
House near Eaton Terrace in the centre of Belgravia. I think it was a 3-story or 4-story building.
Oh. So you bought the Elva Formula Junior.
Well, Bernie had the Elva.
Bernie.
Bernie had the Elva at the time. He was running that, and Chris Steele was mechanicking for him. Have you heard of Chris Steele?
I don't know. No.
Oh, Chris. Well, he came from the Lewisham area, and he'd done some racing in his youth, but he was now mechanicking for Bernie because I believe he had a bad crash, and he was seriously hurt in hospital a long while, so he didn't want to race anymore. But he was still interested in preparing cars. So Dad said, well, how much is it? And he said, he wants £800. So I said, well, let's take it down to Brands Hatch then and see how we go. So Bernie came down with Chris. I jumped in this Elva. I'd never driven an open wheeler before. I was intrigued when I sat in there and I could see the wheels turning on the corners, and this fascinated me, being an open wheeler. And I think I did something like 60 seconds around Brands Hatch the first time out.
It's good going.
And it wasn't bad, because the record, I think Frank Gardner had the record at, I think it was 57 something.
First time out.
First time out, you know, still only sort of, I'm still, I think, 17 in those days, or 18.
Yeah.
But I was rather intrigued by this car, and so we bought it. And it had a whole bay Ford engine in. But I said to Bernie, when I came in the pitch, he said, you were quite quick. I said, what's that? He said, you were the fastest car here today. Well, he would say that because he wanted to buy the car. It may have been true, it may not, I don't know, but I'd like to think it was. Anyway, so we bought this car, and I said, there was only one thing I noticed, which I became very, very adept at later when I built my own cars and I started learning a lot more. I used to study the instruments. And I said the oil pressure was dropping on Paddock Bend. And it was a dry sump engine. And I knew enough to know that the oil pressure shouldn't drop with a dry sump. Well, it would do with the wet sump, because the oil surges out in the corner and the pressure drops, and that's how you run your bearings, and the engine blows up. He said, well, what did it go down to? I said, 25 psi. So they said, oh, that's all right. He said, that's okay. I said, well, anyway, I believe Bernie. Next race was at Mallory Park. You've got that long right-hand bend, Gerard's Corner, after the start. And going round there after one of the 2 laps, there's an almighty bang from the back of the car, and no power. Engine had blown up, oil surge.
Damn.
And so, the block was broken, the pistons were broken, and nightmare. So they got on to Bernie and said, the engine's blown out. He said, what are you going to do about it? And anyway, because they were pals, he said, well, he said, how much is it to repair? So we got a quote from John Reed at Hull Bay up in Suffolk, £400 to repair the engine. So he offered to put in £200. So they agreed then, that was settled.
Good on him. Good man.
Uh-huh.
So, what did you go on to do in the Elva?
Well, the Elva, not a great deal. It wasn't a very good car, in fact. It was on 15-inch wheels, when most of the Formula Juniors were on 13-inch, and it had drum brakes as opposed to disc. It wasn't really competitive. I think the best I ever did, I think, was a second place with it. I didn't race it very much. I took it for quite a high-level meeting at Silverstone. And there was Peter Arundel was there, and some of the fast Formula Junior drivers, and it was just impossible. They were just gone. And I thought it was demoralising. I said, the car's no good. So I got rid of it.
Lotus, the car to have back then.
Lotus 22, or 20 or 22 was the car to have.
Yeah, anyone else was playing catch-up, really, weren't they?
Yeah, it's... the Lotus 18 was a good car. The 20 was even better. The 22 was probably the best.
So you moved that car on quite quickly?
We sold that. I don't know who bought it, but we sold that. And then in '63, I was getting quite professional and quite good, and I was understanding a lot more knowledgeable, a lot more confident, and I understood about the car, workings of the car. I could diagnose certain things, and I managed to win quite a lot. I entered the Autosport Championship series of races, sponsored by Autosport magazine, and I had maximum points at the end of the season and won the championship.
Wow.
The youngest driver ever to win it when I think I was 19 at the time.
Really? Amazing.
And then BP took an interest in me. And I remember the competition manager, nice fellow, John Gooding, invited me to Le Coq d'Or, a very upmarket restaurant in the West End, for lunch. So I went there with Dad, and he said, well, we think you've got possibilities, and we want to sort of keep an eye on you and put you under contract. give you some support. Well, I said, well, thank you very much. That's most helpful. And he said, what are you going to do for next year? So I said, well, we thought we'd go down to Brabham and buy one of his new sports cars. Because sports car racing was just becoming into its own in those sports racing cars. And everybody seemed to want to go sports racing. So he said, fine. He said, well, we'll help. We'll do what we can to help you with that. And I said, okay, thank you very much. And we signed up with BP. Then I went down with Dad and Bernie to see Jack Brabham. His place was at New Hall in Surrey. And I met Jack in the workshop, met Ron first, and he took us into the workshop and met Jack, who was wearing a grey overcoat working on the cars, because he was a very good mechanic, Jack, as well.
Sure.
He was also, I think he was a certified aircraft engineer, because he had his own plane and maintained his own aircraft.
Ah, makes sense.
So,
Yeah.
and he was
so many of them did, didn't they?
He was very good at sorting cars. So he introduced us to Jack, and we went in the office and sat down. And he said, right, we've got this new this new Brabham BT8 coming out next year, and you've got a choice of different engines. There was a 2.7 Climax, a 2.5 Climax, which was the Formula One engine, the new 2-litre short stroke called the FPF, or the new 2-litre V8 BRM. But he didn't recommend that because it was a new engine. And he didn't recommend the 2.7 Climax because they weren't as reliable as the 2.5 apparently. Well, he should know because he became world champion with one. So we thought we don't want to go too far too soon. We'll go for the 2-litre, which was a mistake in fact. I should have gone for the 2.5 because it had 40 bhp more. Anyway, Ron said he'll have the car built by April next year. And we discussed price. The car was £3,800 and he wanted £50 extra for the clutch.
This purchase tax was dodging somewhere.
That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
If you bought a car less certain parts and you fitted them yourselves, you didn't pay purchase tax.
Brilliant.
So £3,850 was the car, the price of the car brand new. And as we came out of the office, I saw a picture of a Formula One car on the wall. And I didn't recognise it. I said to Brabham, I said, what's that F1 car on the wall? Oh, he said, that's our new Formula One car for next year. I said, good looking car, I said. I looked at it. At that same moment, Bernie and I had eye contact, just for that split second. And we're obviously both thinking the same thing.
Mm.
Dad's just bought this car for £3,850, another £1,200. Or thereabouts, we can get an F1 car. And then something happened, there was a distraction, somebody called out from the workshop where Jack had to go out, and that moment passed. I should have gone into Formula One, straight into it.
Well, but maybe if you had have gone into that, you might not have achieved what you later went on to achieve with your own marker cars.
Well, that's true. That's true. Then again, I've been, I sometimes think I missed my destiny there. I don't know, but one can never know. But back in 2015, I went to see Bernie when I came back from Africa, and I mentioned this. And I said, I wonder if I did the right thing, Bernie. And he said, well, you have done. I said, well, why is that? He said, you're still alive, aren't you?
Another one of those moments where he says something simple. Yeah.
And he had a point there.
Makes sense, yeah.
Anyway, what happened was, I had very good, initially with the Brabham, when I took it to Goodwood to drive the car, it was scary. It wouldn't handle at all. It would, going around the corner, it would suddenly sort of dart off to the outside of the track, and the brakes were rock hard. They weren't good, they weren't efficient at all. I wasn't happy with the car. And I wasn't yet that experienced to know what was wrong with it and how to sort it out, because from the Lotus Elite to that Brabham Climax was a big jump, an open racing car. And I didn't know what was wrong with it. So Graham Hill was at the circuit the same day, and Willie said, should I ask Graham if he'll drive it, perhaps give us a guide as to what's wrong with it? Because I didn't know. And so Graham agreed, jumped in the car, he went out and he did about 6 laps. Then he came back, and Willie and I are standing in the paddock waiting for him, and he pulls up, jumps out the car, and he starts to walk away. So I looked at Willie. He asked him to talk to him. I said, Graham, excuse me. I said, Graham, excuse me. I said, what's wrong with the car? He said, it's no bloody good. I said, well, I know that. I said, I want to know what's wrong with it. And he looked at me in that sort of stern way, like I was being a cheeky boy, and he said, if I were you, I would take it back to the makers, and he walked off. So I then came back to London and phoned Ron Townback and said, Ron, let Graham drive your car because I'm having trouble with it. And he said, it's no bloody good. Oh, he said, you shouldn't do that. I said, well, someone's got to do something. But I can't win this car. I said, I can't even drive it at the moment. I was faster than my elite. So he then arranged very kindly for Jack to come down to Goodwood and have a test day with me. So the day arrived, I went down with my mechanic, Ben Bentle. The car was there, and Jack flew down in his aircraft flew himself down from Fair Oaks, where he kept the aircraft, and we spent half a day testing together. I mean, at the time it was nice, but I mean, if I think back now, it was amazing.
Oh, staggering!
I mean, imagine the world champion coming down and testing a car with you for half a day.
Mental. What year was this? Sorry, for this
64.
64, yeah. So
beginning of 64.
Champion by then would he have been? Yeah,
I think so.
Possibly.
Yeah. Anyway, Ben warmed the car up. He jumped in. He went out, did a couple of laps, and came straight back in. And we took this. He took the front off the car and started fiddling with the brake balance bar mechanism because it had twin master cylinders, one for the front, one for the rear of the balance bar, which I hadn't seen before because on the Elite it was like a road car, a single cylinder brake, master cylinder. And he adjusted that, went out again, came in and said, well, the brakes are fine now. The bar wasn't set up properly. He only wanted setting up, so it was a fairly simple thing to do. And he went out again and he came in. He made some adjustments to the anti-roll bar and the shock absorbers, and there was a wire bracket in the back of the chassis, and he took that out. He said, "Did you notice?" I said, "Why are you taking that out?" He said, "Well, did you notice when you drove the car, it goes around the right-hand corners better than left?" Well, I didn't notice. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't going around any corner properly. So he took that out, and he did a few more laps, and said it's better without the bar on. So it's the same on each left or right. Anyway, so he said, you have a go in the car now, see what you think. So I jumped in, and I went out, I did a few laps, and the brakes were far better, much, much better, as they should be. But it's still a bit twisty on the corners, but it was a lot better. I could feel the difference. I came back in, and I asked for our time differences from Ben, because Jack was getting around in 1:28. I was going around in 1:30, 2 seconds slower, which disappointed me. And he obviously saw the disappointment in my face, the look on my face, and he kindly came over and said to me, he said, don't worry, he said, you've lost confidence in the car. He said, but you'll get that back. And thanked him very much. And we walked him back to the aeroplane. And on the way he said, that car is the quickest 2-litre sports car in the country, comparing it to the new lap record which was recently set up. He said, but he said it's difficult to drive. Which didn't really, that sort of, I thought if the world champion's telling me it's difficult to drive, it would be more difficult for me. But that was, as far as it went. But from what I learned with Jack that day and from my previous experience, I was able to sort the car myself quite quickly. And what we did, we increased the rear track, we got some wider rear wheels, we put on the rear spoiler, which made a big difference too, because spoilers were virtually unknown in those days. We put a spoiler on the back, and very importantly, we put on stiffer front springs, which made a big difference. It transformed the car.
Okay, so was it oversteering before then?
No, it was. I think what it was, the front springs were bottoming, going solid, and the thing was just breaking away.
I see.
That made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And we didn't put that bracket back in. Well, Yvonne said we should put the bracket back in, but we didn't do that because Jack said leave it out, so we left it out. But then I went out and I had something like sort of 5 wins straight off, I went to the Martini International Trophy race in June, 50 laps on the Grand Prix circuit, won that outright, broke the lap record, average speed of 105 miles an hour, which was quite quick, wasn't it? In fact, it was virtually Formula One times. Because in those days, Formula One was 1500cc. So with a 2-litre car on an enclosed body, it was almost the same speeds.
And you were rubbing shoulders with the greats of motorsport at that time as well.
Very much so. And that particular year and later years, it became very, very popular, and all the Grand Prix drivers were doing sports racing as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's a page in your book with a grid of cars.
Oh, amazing.
And there was a Goodwood Tourist Trophy, and honestly,
the names
it's
on
just
there.
a who's who. If you think of a 60s racing driver, they're all there.
Well,
Clark,
I was on the grid with 5 world champions.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, amazing.
It was, I think, it was McLaren in pole.
Yeah.
There was Jimmy Clark was next. I think there was Graham Hill in the Ferrari. Although Bruce McLaren, I think, was in pole. I think it was 4 in the front row and 3 in the second row. And I was on the I think the 3rd row of the grid, but I only had a 2-litre engine.
Yeah.
The cars in the front had 4.7-litre Ford or V6 3-4-litre Ferrari engines.
You were ahead of, I remember seeing Innis Island on that grid. There was Dan Gurney.
Oh yeah, Dan Gurney was behind in the 7-litre Daytona.
Yeah, I know.
I think.
Oh, you went on to have an amazing race with him, didn't you? Was that race?
Well, yeah. Well, I was stuck behind him basically. He outdragged me to the first corner, which he would do with 7-litre compared to 2.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons I regretted not having the 2.5 climax in. It would have made a big difference. Big difference.
Yeah.
I look upon that as a mistake, in fact.
Because you had him on the corners, right? But he had you on the straights.
Oh yeah, he could drive rings out on the corner.
Yeah.
And he just pass you, put his foot down and pass you on the straight. And nothing you could do about it.
Did you get past him eventually? I seem to remember you did, didn't you?
Well, I got by him eventually. I think I was stuck behind him for about 10, 15 laps.
Yeah.
And I'm right on his tail, and he obviously knew that. And I think he might have let me go by. I'm not sure now, but I got by him anyway. And I was so angry at being stuck behind him all that time. As we went past the pits, I was in front of the chicane, got through, and I held my hand up and made a rude sign, which was very unlike me. It was, I would never do anything like that normally. I was just so frustrated. And it was wrong, it was rude, I shouldn't have done that. But he obviously took offence. Because as we were coming into the first right-hand corner, I went to turn right, and I suddenly found 7 litres of Daytona Cobra right inside, pulled forcibly off the circuit. He got back in front again. It's I braked. So that was definitely a mistake there. Very, very impolite of me. But I had a very good season with the Brabham. And in fact, I was about to win the Autosport Championship for the 2nd year running. By mid-season, I got maximum points. All I had to do in the final race, which was a 3-hour race at Snetterton, which was partly in day and partly at night, was finished to win. But unfortunately, the engine blew up. I mean, it was a foggy night. It was raining. It was dark. And we were racing at Snetterton, and coming down the straight, I heard this awful bang from the back. I knew what it was because I had it before with the Elva. The engine blown up. And I trudged back across the field to the pits, left the car where it was, and it was sort of very sad actually. It's a sad ending to what was a fantastic season. Yeah. And looking back, I mean, I was so privileged to drive with those people: Clark, McLaren, Hill, Gurney, Richie Ginther.
Yeah. And take it to them as well.
Roy Salvadori.
Roy Salvadori, yeah, just legends.
And you know, being in front of more than half of them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a privilege and an honour.
Amazing, yeah, so fun.
Absolutely fantastic. I was only 22 years old, I think 21 at the time. So still pretty, or 20 or 21, I can't remember now.
Do you appreciate it at the time?
64. I was 21, yeah.
21, wow.
21.
Do you appreciate it at the time? Was it just
Well,
life?
not really. It was sort of life taking a natural progression as far as motor racing was concerned. I was getting better and learning more, and it became a way of life.
It does do that to you, doesn't it, motorsport?
Oh, it did. It creeps up on you.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, I had no idea about motor, no ideals about it at all, no thoughts. It was just something somebody suggested, which I'll have a go at.
So how long after that were you, did you get into imps?
Imps came along at the end of '64. One of Willie's old customers, when he had his own business, had a Roots dealership. So he bought this imp to Willie because it was basically a Coventry Climax designed engine. It was a 848cc single overhead cam, but it was all die-cast aluminium, beautifully made,
Yeah.
and very light. And the engine only weighed about 75 pounds.
Amazing, isn't it? These are Hillman imps, I should
Hillman
say.
imps, yeah. And so we were the first, in fact, to modify a Hillman imp. And Willie got to work on that. Probably some basic stuff at the beginning, just sort of regrinding the camshaft, increasing the compression ratio, and fundamental things like that to get more power. But yeah, it went quite quickly. And then we had other imps coming in, because that car was the first imp to win a competition.
Really? Wow. So were you still working with your father at this point?
No,
Had you broken
no,
away?
I left because once we started with the Brabham, it became a profession. Whereas with the Elite, I used to drive the Elite on the road and use it as a road car as well, for part of the time. And that was kept in the back of the car showroom in Leytonstone.
Right.
But once we bought the Brabham, we then decided, I decided to start Roger Nathan Racing Limited, because I found people were coming to me with their Lotus Elites and asking me to tune their car to different levels of, from fast road use to racing.
Yeah, brilliant.
And one of my customers was Max Mosley.
Ah. So that is another fascinating point, actually, because the forewords to both of your books, you got Bernie Eccleston, and the second book is Max Mosley. The two men that sort of ran motorsport for all those years.
Yeah.
So what are your impressions of Max?
Max, he was very articulate and very, very intelligent. He came across as a typical public school boy. Good background.
An interesting background.
Interesting, yeah.
Should we say?
Right, yeah. Well, we won't go into that on the interview, but I never had any problem with Max, in fact. We got on quite very well together. And when he started March, I became his European sales agent.
Right. And that was part of Roger Nathan.
No, that was only the Roger Nathan racing. That was way afterwards.
Right.
I stopped racing by then.
Yeah, I've heard people that have met him on interviews and stuff like that. So he was one of the most fascinating men you could ever meet. Just 'cause he was so intelligent,
Well, he was.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was just a friend.
Yeah.
A customer and a friend. You didn't really delve into it that much. He was another guy. But he was obviously, he was ahead in many ways.
Yeah. So, back to the imps. You were saloon car racing at that point.
Yeah. Well, once we started Roger Nathan Racing, we used the workshop from my brother's branch in Brixton off Clapham Park Road. It was in a side street called Plato Road, and it went down a little slope into this workshop, and there was a door on the right, and it was actually a house of ill repute on top.
We was on top.
House of ill repute.
Right, I see.
Well, so a knocking shot would be acceptable, but that was alongside the workshop. Nothing to do with us. I mean, it just happened to be there.
Got to fund the racing somehow.
Well, no, that was nothing. That was another part. It was another property entirely. It just happened to be built over the workshop, which was sort of half below ground. Anyway, we had this workshop, and we ran the Brabham from there and started Roger Nathan Racing from there. Lots of elites came in, including Max's, and we worked on the elites. And we started modifying Hillman imps as well, producing conversions for them, which became quite a big business, in fact. And we built up a good clientele. We used to do cylinder heads, whole race engines, in fact, whole racing imps, fitting fiberglass doors, boot and bonnet. And we had a works imp as well. We actually fitted a Coventry Climax to an FWE engine. We took out the imp, put in the FWE Climax. But because of the extra weight, it was a sandcast block on the Climax with a much heavier engine, it was no quicker than the imp. So we took the Climax out and we turned the imp engine. It was fitted in this something like 35 degrees to the right. So it had side draft carburetors. So we turned it through. We turned it through 45 degrees, out of 45 degrees. We turned it from 90 degrees to 45 degrees so we could use downdraft carburetors. I cut a hole at the top of the Hillman imp, put an airbox over it. And it was a very quick imp, in fact. One of the quickest.
Wow.
And we got a lot of lap records with that. And it became popular. Then we raced with, our chief competition was Bill McGovern in the Emery imp, and Bernard Unit and Ray Calcutt in the Fraser imps. They generally had more power than me, but I was faster around the corners. But I didn't like driving saloon cars because having driven with the world champions in the BD8 sports car into saloon cars where people were bumping and boring and making contact, I didn't like it. And to keep the imp ahead, you'd have to, for example, coming down the straight at Brands, Bill would pull ahead at the end of the straight, and I just not brake. I throw the thing in sideways in front of him, put it sideways, and he couldn't. And I go around the paddock bend, just this thing at 45 degrees, so nobody could pass me. So they were faster on the straight. So anyway, I could keep in front. But we did have an incident one day. We came down the straight, Bill McGovern and myself, and it was 2 10-lap heats in the final. And we were actually touching going down the straight past the grandstand. So after the first heat, we were summoned to race control and given a lecture by Nick Syret, the BRSCC General Secretary, who said quite plainly, he said, "You cannot do that." He said, you cannot go in front of the grandstand and start colliding like that, going to the paddock bend. He said, "It's just not done." And we said, "Well, very sorry, Nick, you won't do it again." Then he said, "Well," he said, "if you have to do it," he said, "do it around the back where no one can see you." But I didn't like saloon car racing for that very reason. I felt it was spoiling my style.
Sure.
Because I mean, you never think of colliding with or nudging anybody when you got up to the standard I was in, the high level of racing. You just wouldn't do it. It's unthinkable. So I think got Gordon Jones, who used to drive a very fast Gullwing Marcos,
Right.
the old Humpty Dumpty one. Who also he was up with us with the elites with Les and Des.
Right.
Les and Graham rather. He was almost as quick in the Marcos, so he took over driving the imp. I carried on with the Brabham, and he drove the imps for me.
I see. So you're works driver at that point.
He was, yeah, Gordon was, yeah.
Brilliant. But it was, of course, the imps that led you onto a real point of fascination, which is, of course, your own design, your own sports cars.
Yeah, yes, it came about because Frank Costin was a friend of Willis from Lotus. They'd obviously worked together before. And one day Frank came in the workshop talking to Willie and said he's got this new sports car he wanted to build. And he was looking for a suitable engine. And Willie said, "I've got just the engine you want." And so Frank said, "Oh," well, he said, "What's that?" He said, "There's one here in the shop," he said. "It's over there on the bench." He said, "Go across, just walk across and pick it up and bring it back over here." And Frank said, "Don't be silly, Willie. No, just go and pick it up." He said, "You can do it." So Frank looked at him and went over there. He picked this engine up, and I could pick it up. And he carried it across, put it down. He said, "It's just what we want." And that was the beginning of the collaboration between Costin and myself.
Amazing, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, talk us through that. How did it come about? What was the...
Well, we asked Frank, what he was going to build and tell us about this new sports car, and he told us about it, and it sounded very interesting. And remember, Frank worked for de Havilland after the war, so he was very much into wood from the Mosquito.
There you go. That's where the wood comes from, yeah.
So, and obviously he'd be building Marcoses, and we all knew what a Marcos was. You know how they got the name Marcos, don't you?
I don't actually know.
Well, you got Frank Costin, who was the designer, and Jem Marsh, the builder.
Yeah, yeah.
So Marcos.
Very natural.
Yeah. So we thought, well, how about if you design the cars, Frank, and we build them for you? Because Frank was a designer. He wasn't really a manufacturer. He was a designer. And at this time, I'd been joined by Cedric Selzer. Now, Cedric was Jimmy Clark's mechanic at Team Lotus when he was world champion. He lived in Golders Green, South African. And Cedric, I met him and we got on very well. So I actually gave him a job, because what had happened with the Brabham, because I didn't have the big engine in the Brabham, I decided I want for this 1965 a bigger engine so I can get outright wins and be on the level with McLaren and with their 4.7 litre engines. And because of our connection with the imps through Roots, who actually were bought out by Chrysler, the Chrysler Corporation in America. And one of the directors of Chrysler, we were talking to him on the telephone, and he said, well, we've got an engine that you might want to buy from us. We've got an Oldsmobile engine, a V8 Olds, 4.5 litre, with an aluminium block. Huge weight saving. Those V8 arm blocks are very heavy, they weigh hundreds of pounds. And so we thought, well, one of those in the back of that BT8 would be ideal. Because being an aluminium block, it wasn't much heavier than the Sandcast Climax engine of 2 litre.
Yeah, crazy.
Very little
crazy
difference.
Yeah.
So we asked Frank if he could do the installation for us. So the car was sent to Wales, and over the winter of '64, Frank installed this V8 Olds engine in the back of the Brabham. But it was a wet sump engine.
Quite a machine, yeah.
It had something like 350 pounds-feet, no, I think 400 pounds-feet of torque, compared to sort of a couple of hundred for or less for the Climax. Big difference.
Huge, huge. But just going back to the Costin, the Nathan Costin. So I mean, what was the sort of makeup of the car? I mean, naturally you've got the Imp engine and transaxle gearbox, which lends itself perfectly for a mid-engine sports car.
Yes, quite.
With the rest of the car, so it was what exactly?
Well, Frank built the prototype in Wales. He obviously sent the engine and transaxle. It was an Imp transaxle as well.
Yeah.
But in the Imp, the gearbox was in front of the engine. The engine used to hang out the back of the Imp.
Right.
Which is the wrong place for it.
Of course,
the way it was built. So it meant that if you're going to use the Imp transaxle, you've got to put it behind the engine and turn it upside down. Otherwise you'd have 4 reverse gears and 1 forward. Anyway, so we let Frank figure that one out. So we sent him the engine and gearbox. He installed it. And what it was a complete wooden monocoque. The whole car was a wooden monocoque made of a Gabon ply, which is a bit like balsa wood, or Gabon ply. It came from Gabon in Central Africa.
Any particular reason for that?
Well, it was very strong and light, very light like balsa wood, but it was stronger.
Right.
And obviously on the chassis, where you had the stress sections or stress areas, you had hardwoods like yew and other hardwoods, and the skin was made of this Gabon ply.
Wow.
So you had a structure which was very rigid. I think Frank mentioned a figure of 3,200 pounds-feet in terms of rigidity.
Right, okay.
300 pounds-feet, I think, per inch. I forget what it was now. The technical terms. I got it in my notes anyway. It was very stiff and very light. And with the Imp engine and transaxle, which was also very light, the whole car only weighed about 700 and odd pound.
It's crazy.
Ready to race. That's with fuel and water, everything.
Yeah.
It was super light.
Yeah, it was something like 380 kilos, wasn't it?
It was
reference, something like that. Wait,
372 kilos actually.
Yeah, wow, that's ridiculous.
Well, it's the weight of a big motorbike.
Yeah. So it was like and then it was about 100 horsepower.
100 bhp. So it worked out at 300 bhp per tonne, basically.
Yeah, what a thing. What a thing. And things like the wishbones, were they bespoke wishbones? Or you used bits from other cars?
No, it was all made up specially. But Frank made everything for the prototype.
Mm.
I mean, the wishbones were made of 18 gauge tube. The chassis was all 18 gauge tube, very thin.
Yeah, and of course with the iconic Costin nose as well.
The aerodynamics, of course, played a big part.
Yeah.
And the original body we had made by Williams and Pritchard. No, Frank made the original body in Wales. It was thin gauge aluminium, very light. Everything was light, and he cut the heads of bolts off as they stuck through the nuts past the locking area. He cut the tops off to save weight. I mean, save weight wherever possible.
Yeah.
And of course, being so light, not only did it go quickly, it stopped quickly and went round corners quicker.
Of course. Yeah, what was it Chapman said? power makes you go faster on the straights. Losing weight makes you go faster everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that was exactly right. We booked the Dorchester Hotel in Park Lane for the preview on, I think, in December 1965. And sort of the day before, or 2 days before, we hadn't seen the car yet. And Frank sort of came rushing down the day before. The car was unpainted and still a lot of work to do. There's no trim in it. It was just the bare bones. So we sort of worked all day and all that night before the preview to get the car finished and painted, which we did. And as we drove it to the show on the trailer, or the preview, the paint was still drying. And then we had to somehow get into the Dorchester Hotel through the back entrance, a bit tight. We got it in there. And we had a very nice press review. Sterling Moss turned up, Jack Fairman.
Really?
A lot of people came, yeah. I got pictures of that, and it was very interesting. Then we took the car to Brands for a track test. And John Bolster came down at the same time, which wasn't very wise, really, because I should have tested the car first, make sure it would work properly. But we were in a big hurry. So he came down at the same time, and I went out and drove the car, and it went very well. I got round Brands in something like 57 seconds, which was Formula 3 times, or Formula Junior times.
Absolutely.
And we had a Heck engine in, not a highly modified, just for testing. The brakes were fantastic, and it wanted very little doing to it. And John Bolster jumped in and went out, and he did a write-up on the car from that day.
Glowing report, I hope.
It was fine, yeah. Then we obviously got it back to the works, and we developed it further, put in a properly modified high-power engine, and it just won everything. It won race after race, and wherever it went, we got lap records.
That's awesome. So there's some great sort of tales with it. I mean, there was one in particular at Montlhéry, the banked.
Yeah, that's
French.
That was that was probably one of my best races.
Yeah.
I got 3 best races. That I think was one of them, if not the best. In terms of publicity, it was probably the best. I had a French agent at the time called Dr. Moloff. Spoke fluent German, French, obviously English. Very nice fellow. He was the Abarth agent before, and he'd left Abarth first. It must have fallen out for some reason. He left Abarth.
It's ironic.
And, and he became my agent. And he called me and said, well, can you bring the car over to France and race it? Because I want to sell them, and I need to get it publicised here. Because in those days, I wasn't very well known on the continent. It's not like today where everybody knows everything all around the world on the internet. I mean, you read magazines which came out once a week, so you read everything a week later, and then that way you learn about people. So I was virtually unknown on the continent. And he applied for this race at Montlhéry, the bank circuit, concrete banking, just outside Paris. And I packed up the transporter. We had a Commer van, courtesy of Roots. And then we had a trailer behind, and my mechanic from the West Country, Tony. We packed up and off we went to Paris. And met Dr. Moloff, and then went on to the circuit. And it was a big event. It was an international event qualifying for the European Sports Car Championship. And Abarth were there in force with their main driver, Johann Ortner, an Austrian guy. And
There were a great many cars as well, wasn't there? A number of...
they had about 20 mechanics there, and a Ferrari Transporter. It was a big deal. I mean, Fiat behind it, unlimited money, and engine development was very good. Better. They had more power than we had. And we went to scrutineering, and when we got there, we took the body panels off the scrutineers to see underneath. And when people saw it was made of wood, because we hadn't painted, we only painted the outside, we left all the inside wood. Yeah. They were laughing at this wooden car, and there was a lot of curiosity, much interest. And Senor Avidano, the Fiat team manager, walked over. He heard all this laughing going on at scrutineering, what's going on, with one of his teammates. And they looked at the car, and they were talking, and then they both started laughing. And I remember Avidano kicked the rear tyre, laughed, and walked off, which I didn't like that kick of the rear tyre. It was a bit of an insult, I thought. Anyway, so I took it. So, got through scrutineering, which in itself wasn't easy because they had a lot of problems in those days with English cars beating the opposition, and they would try to find fault. Chapman had that problem with the elite. he swore he never raced at Le Mans again because he kept
Yes.
finding fault, tried to stop him running. Because they knew he win the index of thermal efficiency, which they wanted to win for their Simcas or their Renault, whatever they were.
Sure. Because I think he did win it in the elite one.
He didn't.
Well, maybe not him, but
no,
as a privateer.
somebody did win it, yeah, but he swore he'd never go there again.
That was after the Lotus 23 debacle, wasn't it?
Was it the 23 or was it the 23? Yes,
I
because
think it was.
the 4 and 6 stud hubs.
Yeah.
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 And it was the Lotus 23. He swore he'd never go there again.
Yeah.
Anyway, so got through scrutineering, no problem at all. Probably because nobody took it seriously. I mean, here I was, an unknown English driver, 20 odd years old, with a wooden car he built himself, up against the might of Fiat. I mean, it was laughable. So, anyway, in theory it was laughable. Anyway, went out to practice, and I hadn't driven on the bank circuit before. It's quite a different experience, because if you go into a bend too fast, and the circuit is bumpy, it's these concrete slabs, when you hit the bump, the thing jumps up a yard, and if you get near the top, you can actually go over the top and fall down 30 feet. I don't remember any guardrail being there in those days. But I don't remember seeing one. Anyway, and the car was bottoming. Every time it bottomed, it sort of leapt up the side of the banking. And I thought, this is no good. A, it's not safe. It could damage the car. And B, I don't want to go over the top of the banking. So I came into the pits, told Tony what was wrong, said, stiffen up, increase the front ride height by 1 inch, stiffen the shock absorbers, some thicker bump rubbers, Aeon rubbers on the shocker, in case it comes down again, and stiffen up the rear anti-roll bar. Went out again, learnt the circuit, did what I thought was a good time, and came back in the paddock. And then a few minutes later, Dr. Moloff comes running over, looking very excited, waving a piece of paper. And I said, what is it, Dr. Moloff? He said, he always called me Mr. Nathan, and I always called him Dr. Moloff. This went on for years. It was never Roger or Dimitri. Anyway, and it's very formal. And he said, we've got fastest time. Well, he was surprised. I wasn't surprised. I expected to get fastest time because we had a good car. Yeah. And I'd learnt the circuit, and I was used to winning in that car. I knew what he could do.
Yeah. Pleased. The Bath team.
He looked very excited, and then I noticed very shortly afterwards, Avedano came over with his colleague again, and they looked at the car and they weren't laughing this time. I can tell you. They were very, very serious concerned because they were leading. They were leading the championship with Johan Ortner. Oh. They wanted the points.
Yeah, that says a lot, doesn't it?
They didn't. Anyway, so, but then again, people didn't really believe it. They thought maybe it was a timekeeper's error because in those days you had the watches manually done timekeeping. Oh, we'll click it now. It's gone by. Never mind. So it could have been a mistake, and most people I think thought it was a mistake. Nonetheless, that's the time I got, so I was on pole position. If I wasn't on pole, I wouldn't have won. Because the A-Bath was faster down the straight, they had more power. Because they had unlimited facilities for developing the engines. And we didn't have that kind of facility. So they had quite a lot more power, but they were heavier. So I realised from that unless I got into that first corner after the start, which was a right-hand corner, I couldn't win the race. That race was going to be won or lost on that first corner. Because if the A-Bath got in front of me, there were several of them, if one got in front, Ortner would then, I'd be blocked off, Ortner would get in front, faster down the straight, and he'd disappear, never catch him up. So I had to get into that corner first, essential. So, front row, as myself in pole, there's Ortner next to me, and there's somebody else on the outside. I get it from I forget who it was now, another Fiat, probably another A-Bath probably. And I had to make a good start, which I didn't always do. So I tended to go easy on the clutch. I was over worried about clutches for some reason. Still am today. I'm teaching her to drive. If you stick slipping the clutch, it drives me mad. Anyway, so I got it just right, just the right amount of revs, enough wheel spin without staying on the same spot too long. Got it just right and pulled off. And initially, because we're lighter, up to about 70 miles an hour, I was able to pull out a slight lead over the A-Bath. But as we approached the corner, it was probably about an 85 mile an hour corner, quite quick. I could see the A-Bath starting to draw ahead from my periphery vision in the left eye. I saw this red shape come alongside, but this time we'd actually passed the normal braking point. I forget what sign it was, 200 yards or 100 yards or something, I forget now. But that flashed by, and neither of us would give way. We were both desperate to get into this corner first, because he obviously knew if I got in front of him, he wouldn't be able to catch me. And I knew if he got in front of me, I'd lose. So we were both pulling all the stops into this corner. And he actually drew slightly ahead. I kept my foot down. I didn't back off at all. All of a sudden, he'd gone. He put the brakes on. So I went into the corner, but far too quick. The thing went sideways. I'm trying to hold the slide. It's going more and more sideways. I've got this huge angle of drift. I've got full opposite lock. I'm on my fingertips on the steering wheel to try and hold this drift. And it's sliding towards the outside of the circuit. I've gone nearly too quick. At the same time, I could do this in those days. I was very quick. I had a quick look in the mirror, see what's going on behind. And I could see the cars behind had backed off, thinking I'm going to have one monumental accident. And they didn't want to get involved. The car was going and drifting. And it actually got to the very edge of the circuit. And I managed to hold it and not get it onto the grass, because I had it got off the grass on one wheel. That was it. I had a terrible accident. It was going quite quickly. But I held the slide, put my foot down as soon as I stopped the slide, pulled off down the straight, won by a huge margin. I mean,
No timekeeper's error there.
And the car ran faultlessly, and won by. You couldn't see in the distance. You couldn't even see the A-Baths. It was so far behind.
Magic. Yeah.
Got back into the paddock, and there's a picture. I'll show you the picture later. It was amazing. There was pretty girls giving me big bouquets of flowers, big silver cups, cold champagne in. I didn't drink, but I drank on that day. I tell you, it was delicious. It was like nectar. It was fantastic. The television cameras were there. It was a big deal. It was an international meeting. And when things quietened down, Dr. Moloff suddenly came up to me and looking a bit down in the mouth. And I said, "What is it, doctor?" He said, "It's the A-Bath team." He said, "They put in their process our car is illegal." And I said, "Well," what are the grounds of the protest? What's wrong with our car? They're saying that the windscreen is illegal. I said, "Well, let's have a look at the FIA yearbook and see what it says about windscreens." So we got the FIA yearbook out of the van, opened it up, Appendix J Group 6 sports racing cars, and it said, "And the windscreen shall be made of safety glass," which ours wasn't. It was Perspex. But it went on to say, "or of a material specified by the manufacturer." So it was ambiguous.
Yes.
So A-Bath had a point, they thought. So they protested to the stewards. And of course, the stewards had the FIA book as well. And they couldn't rule on it. But by this time, they give me the prize money. They wouldn't give me the cup because of the protest by A-Bath. In the end, they found they couldn't rule, and we referred to the FIA in Paris. And then we had about several months of letters going backwards and forwards to lawyers to the FIA in Paris, and eventually ruled in their wisdom that I was the rightful winner of the race, and I could keep the prize money and have the cup, but A-Bath would get the points.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's a political decision.
Yeah.
I mean, they had to let me win because I legally won and my car wasn't illegal according to their regulations.
Yeah.
But A-Bath wanted the points, so they gave the points. I didn't want the points. I wasn't in the championship. I couldn't care less.
Yeah.
But you can see what's behind it, the thinking behind it. And then we sold quite a lot of cars in France and Germany after that.
I bet you would.
In Belgium, one of our cars went to Belgium, won the Belgium Drivers' Championship. And we started really building racing cars.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Well, but they always wouldn't.
Always wooden, all wooden monocoques. I'll show you some pictures later on, and some cutaway drawings, you'll get a better idea. The whole monocoque from front to end was wood, and you had on the front a space frame which carried the front suspension and radiator, and the back carried the engine and rear suspension.
And you also took them to Le Mans, right?
Well, yeah, but we had to build a closed version for that, a GT version. But
And that was with an imp. It's still with an imp engine.
yes, but it had to be over 1,000 cc, so we had to have a special block made, which Fruit supplied. Just over, it was 1,006 cc.
Right.
Because of the cylinder thickness, we couldn't. You couldn't get it much bigger because it would go into the water jacket.
Why did you need to have it?
Well, because the minimum cc allowed to enter the race was 1,000 cc.
I see.
We could get it to 998, but we couldn't bore it out anymore without the special block from roots,
I see. Yeah.
which gave us an extra few thou of cylinder wall thickness.
And was that a speed differential thing?
No, it made no difference at all. Same BHP. It was only sort of 8 cc's.
But their ruling, they didn't want the cars under a litre because they didn't want
Under a litre, it had to be over a litre.
They wanted, yeah.
And if you put it in as a 998, had we won, of course, and they checked it, we would have been disqualified. Because we wanted to win the index of thermal efficiency, which we would have won if the car had finished.
I remember reading, weren't you clocking 150 or something, 145 down the Mulsanne?
Well, we had to have a special 5-speed box made because the sports racing car, it was a Jack Knight gearbox. It was only a 4-speed box. Because we needed an extra gear, he made us up a 5-speed arrangement, which we used for Le Mans. But we couldn't get, because it was quite a complicated gear linkage, we couldn't get all the movement, all the gears on one lever. We could get the 4 gears on one lever, the 5 forward speeds, but we couldn't get reverse in the linkage. It just wouldn't work technically. So we had a separate lever for reverse on a cable. So we actually had 2 gear levers. So in theory, we could have put it in first and reverse at the same time. So you had to be a bit careful with that.
Sure.
Anyway, so we decided we'll do Le Mans. So Frank built the GT version, which had proper doors and obviously a roof, a different rear body.
Right.
The top deck, the sides were the same, but the actual top deck was different, a bit different. Not that you notice it unless you were told. We took that to Snetterton. Wolof got us the entry for the race, which wasn't easy. He got the entry for the race, and we all geared up to go with the caravan there and everything else. But we didn't actually finish the car until about 2 weeks before the race. And I was thinking of cancelling the entry because, one doesn't usually go to Le Mans with a brand new untried car. So I thought, well, before I cancel, he's just got too close. I thought, we'll go to Snetterton and we'll have a test day there and see how it runs. So you put in a hack engine, 85 cc, 85 bhp, something like that. And went to Snetterton, did 75 laps, broke the lap record, and it never missed a beat. Everything worked perfectly. So I thought, well, on that basis, we last 24 hours, we can put up a good show at least. So I decided we'll go. Went to Le Mans, got through scrutineering, had all the team there, and then went out to practice, and that's where our troubles started. We found very quickly that it developed this misfire, which was intermittent. One time it was there, another time it wasn't there, then it was fine, and we couldn't find it. And then we had other problems. We found it was overheating. We were getting weak mixture, and the thing was running hot and overheating. So we had to build a cover over the rear bodywork, which was open, to make it into an airbox to try and get the mixture settings right. And then we blew a head gasket because it overheated. And then the brakes started binding and the clutch started slipping, and we had endless problems. But the main problem was this misfiring, which was steadily getting worse. And we had Lucas there. This is the point, in fact. Lucas, when they knew we were going to Le Mans, offered to come down with their special aircraft quality wire, instead of our normal standard plastic cover wire, and make the loom for us at no cost. I said, well, thank you very much, that's fine. So they sent down a technician with a special wire and made the whole loom up for us. And so the same technician was at Le Mans with Lucas, and he checked it, and he couldn't find anything wrong. And it wasn't fuel starvation, we didn't know what it was. And we tried fiddling about, but we could not cure that misfire, because sometimes it was there, and the other times it wasn't. So when you went to check it, if it wasn't there, you couldn't find it. It was a problem, a big problem. And then at the start of the race, we had to run across the track in those days. We sort of chased across the track and jumped in. Nobody bothered putting seat belts on because it would take time. And I had this Rolex watch with a stainless steel Rolex watch with a push faster. And I jumped into the car, and I must have strained a bit, and the strap burst open, and it slipped down over my hand and trapped it on the gear lever. So I'm sitting here at the start of the 24-hour race, and I can't get my hand off the gear lever. So,
Yeah, you couldn't make it up.
and at the same time, I'm trying to start the car. It wouldn't start at all this time. This was the first time it wouldn't start. The misfire was always there, coming and going, but it always started. This time it wouldn't start at all. It was an absolute disaster. And we ran for 4 hours, but it was so slow with the misfire going down the straight. It was starting to get a bit dark, and I thought this is going to be dangerous. And we're not going to do it. It's not going to last much longer anyway. So I just pulled in. But going down the straight, we had gearing in for 155 miles an hour. But you obviously changed the ratios. We've got the height. And we'd reached maximum speed, which was about 150. Wouldn't get much more than that. A third of the way down the Muldown Straight. So we kept it at sort of maximum revs all the way, all the 2/3 of the rest of the way down the straight at maximum revs. And I'm sitting there at night time during practice when it wasn't misfiring. I'm going down the straight happily at 150 miles an hour on the keeping to the right, and you get these lights twinkling in the mirror, and they get larger, and all of a sudden, wow! You've got these Ford GT, or they were Mark IV Fords, going by you 80 miles an hour quicker in the dark on headlights. No street lights,
Yeah.
all on car headlights.
And the slipstream.
And you feel the car pull about 3 feet over to the left in the slipstream and get it back again to the right.
Staggering.
Yeah. But where we were staying at this little restaurant on the start-finish, on the main straight, it was called Les Leston, French name, obviously. And it had a little restaurant outside, and there was a fence, not a fence, it was a hedge, a small hedge, on the side of the straight. And people are sitting here eating and having their coffees and stuff, and you've got these cars going by on the other side of the hedge. You had 200 miles an hour.
Crazy. Crazy time. So you went on to develop the Costa Nathans into the Astra.
Yes, we did. Well, Frank and I, we had a falling out because the deal was that Frank would build the prototype and carry on with development and build the monocoques. But then he got caught up with Brian Hart. They were friends, in fact. And Brian Hart had just built the Protos, which was it was a wooden monocoque which Frank designed, a Formula Junior car, which didn't do any good, in fact. And so Frank then didn't have time to make the monocoques for me. Meanwhile, I was working on these cars and selling them, and we had a dozen orders for cars, and we didn't have any monocoques. I'd taken deposits. I said, Frank, I've taken people's money on these cars as deposits. I need the monocoques. And he said, well, he's busy. Frank was not, he was not a production man. He was a development engineer, and that's where his interest lay. And if he didn't want to do it, well, that's fine. But I mean, I felt a bit let down, frankly. He didn't stay with me, because we could have gone a long way together. So there was some animosity there. And he went and carried on with Brian Hart trying to develop that Protos. And in the meantime, I had to find someone to make these monocoques. They were highly complex things, made of wood. And I approached, the obvious thing to do was approach a boat builder. I went to Vosper Thornycroft. And I said, I told him about the boat, and it was about the monocoque and what we needed and what we wanted to do. And they looked at some drawings and things and said, we can do this. I said, fine. He said, but we're going to need to tool up, and you're going to need to place an order for at least 100 monocoques to start, to cover our tooling costs. And we didn't have the money for 100 monocoques. I mean, we only sold 12 anyway at the beginning.
Yeah.
So it wasn't on. And I then searched around to try and find someone who would do this at reasonable cost. And it wasn't easy. I couldn't find anybody. Eventually, I don't know how I got onto it. I don't know whether I thought of it myself or whether somebody else did. But there's a firm that made the Oxford and Cambridge racing sculls. They were based on Ilpie Island and Twickenham.
Right.
And I went there, and it was a firm called George Sims Racing Boats. And the manager, he wasn't part of the family, but his name was George Sims by coincidence. And he said, well, I said what we needed. And I said, can you help us? And he looked at it and thought about it. And he said, stroking his beard, well, he said, we build boats, we don't build racing cars. We said, we can give it a go. I thought, thank goodness for that. And we supplied him as much as we could in the way of drawings and materials, which were minimal, because there were very few drawings. Most of it was in Frank's head. I mean, when he handed over the production to me, he came down with a load of stuff in a van. There were sheets of plywood with lines drawn on curves, and a line's crossed off, and it's got plus 0.25 here, or minus ½ inch here. I mean, but you couldn't decipher it. He knew it because it's all in his head. You couldn't give it to a third party and say, build us this from these bits of information. It was a big problem. And then when the first monocoque was produced, we tried to offer the frame up to it. We found that the holes in the metal frame were half a hole out over the brackets on the monocoque. Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't fit.
Not surprising, really.
Yeah. So we got over there. It took a bit. It all took time. I mean, it wasn't insoluble, but it just took time, sure. And we didn't have the time. So we were working day and night to try and get us just to a level where we could build these monocoques and get the cars to the customers.
All the joys, isn't it? Oh. With the season approaching and all that sort of stuff.
Well, exactly. I mean, it was a huge challenge, but we got it sorted. Yeah. And over the next year, I had everything drawn properly by a firm of draftsmen I found in Potter's Bar. But it was harder than it should have been.
Sure. A
lot harder.
So was it in the Astra or the Nathan that both were Nathan cars, obviously, but was it in the Astra or the Nathan that you went on to win the was it 2 championships in a car of your own?
Oh yeah.
Whilst you driving, of course, which makes you an elite company, really. Okay, well,
I'll just get on to the Astra for a moment because that's at a later stage. But just to continue this last bit of the story, because Frank had pulled out, I didn't see any reason to keep his name on the cars, and the next development was a car called the Astra. So instead of calling it a Costin Nathan Astra, I just dropped Costin's name from it because we designed that ourselves. But we were using a wooden monocoque, but the rear chassis, rear suspension, everything else, and the engines were all different. So that was why it was called an Astra, and Costin wasn't mentioned in that.
I see.
Because he wasn't part of that project.
Sure. And where did the name Astra come from?
Well, it was part of the RAF motive.
Right.
Oh.
Ad Astra par Adua or something.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Unto the stars.
Are there any Costin Nathans around?
Oh, yes. There's at least 13 around I know of.
Oh, wow.
There's one in Australia. Bruce Mansell's got that. He's been building it for the last 12 years, or restoring it. And there's another one in Austria. A fellow called Klaus Tweddle's got one. There's one in Australia. It was the one that won the Luxembourg Drivers' Championship.
Wow.
There's another one. Well, I've got 2. I've got the prototype, which I've restored. Which it's here. It's in England. It's in storage at the moment in a specialised facility. The original prototype, the open car.
Fantastic. Yeah.
And that was one of the finalists in the Octane Restoration of the Year in 2019. Amazing. It took 3 years to rebuild it. A huge job.
Did you have to make all new monocoque?
Because making the monocoque must be incredibly involved. The monocoque couldn't be restored because it had been kept in an unheated garage for 45 years. It was a barn find, and the monocoque was gone rotten. Wood doesn't fatigue. It wasn't the fatigue. It was the fact that it was mouldy and rotten. You couldn't. If you tried to bolt something to it, you'd just pull away. So we had to build a new monocoque, copying the old one. And again, I had the same problem again. Sort of 50 years later, couldn't find one to build a monocoque. It's funny how history repeats itself. Yes.
But eventually, I was talking to Bruce Mansell in Australia. That's the chap who has another, the one that won the Luxembourg Drivers' Championship. And I said, I'm having a hell of a job with this monocoque, Bruce. He said, I know someone who can do that for you. I said, oh, who? He said, Mr. Wood. I said, be serious, Bruce. I said, I've got a problem here. No, he said, it's Mr. Wood. He lives on a sheep small holding in South Wales, in Pembrokeshire. And his name is Friend. Friend, spelt like friend but pronounced free end, Wood. Mr. Wood. So I was going to see Mr. Wood. And I went to meet Friend, and he's an absolutely charming fellow. And he also, interestingly, he was a protege of Costin. He had a lot of Costin's paperwork.
No way.
He knew Costin personally, of course. They'd done some things together. And he was a huge fan of Costin's. So when he was presented with the opportunity to build another monocoque, I mean, he was over the moon.
Made for the job.
Oh, but he was a master craftsman. He was building furniture for the bishops and things for their dinner tables, all handcrafted furniture, carved woods and things, and the other carvings in churches. He'd reproduce all those. He was a highly skilled man, a master craftsman. He was totally unassuming, a charming fellow, very knowledgeable. Interesting guy to talk to.
I bet, yeah. I bet.
Very interesting. Also, technically, he built his own wooden car, which I think Costin had some to do with the design of the bodywork, but the whole car was made of wood. The whole car, even the body was made of wood. The petrol tank was made of wood.
What?
Yes, and obviously it had some lining in it, some polyester or some sort of lining, but the tank was made of wood. The filler cap was turned from solid wood, a screw-on filler cap.
No way.
Yes, and the hubcaps were made of wood.
That's brilliant.
It's called the Tryan, Tryanne, I think, Tryan. It's an odd-looking thing. It's a bit like a sort of a flattened-out spaceship on 3 wheels with one of those 650 Citroen engines in.
Hilarious. There wasn't there a theory with the wooden monocoque that actually it would be safer in a crash?
Well, there was, because in theory what would happen, I did have a crash, but instead of in a metal car, it would transmit the shock through to the driver. Or if you crumpled at the front, all the tubes would come and break your legs. So the front would be pushed in, cave in, box sections, tubes, longitudinal tubes. So with the monocoque, if you had a prang, it would absorb the shock in that corner, and it wouldn't transmit it through the whole chassis, and only be damage localised where it hit something solid. It wouldn't distort the whole thing.
Interesting. And
well, that was the theory.
You put that to the test.
I did have a crash at Brands once. Unlike me, going into Hawthorne Bend on the Grand Prix circuit. I went in too quick. I don't know why. I passed this Lotus 47. Got a bit careless. I don't know why. Anyway, made a mistake. Too quickly, just spun off at a very high speed. And it spun round, and it came back. It spun and it started going backwards at high speed onto the inside of the circuit, and it hit the bank backwards. And I was sort of dislodged from my seat. And when I was dislodged, when it finally stopped, the edge of the seat, because we had no seat belts, it caught me in my back, and it really hurt my ribs. I thought I'd broken some ribs, but I hadn't, in fact. But no big deal. We just sort of remade the rear frame and repaired it. Because you can glue wood together again, it's fine.
Yes. So when did the championship wins? Because you had 2 championship wins come in your own cars.
Yes, that was in 1968. The 2 championships were the Motoring News GT Championship and the Tootle Menswear GT Championship. They're running parallel. And
with different capacity cars, is that right?
Oh yeah, all different capacity
engines.
Yeah.
So you won 2 championships in the same year.
Yeah.
In your own cars.
Yeah, but they were obviously bigger. I mean, mine was a small class, a 1 litre, so we had the IMB engine in it, and it went up to 2 litre, and then they went up to 3. But because we won all our classes, on my classes, we got maximum points, won both championships.
I see. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, as I say, it puts you in elite company. I mean, there's very few people who've actually done that. Brabham is one of them. McLaren, I think, did it as well. But when you try and list out the names of people who won a championship driving in a car with bearing their name, very few people. So it's...
Yes, well, that's true, especially a series, because there's probably at least 12 races per championship throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah, it says a lot. It says a lot.
And then again, Le Mans, I think the other people who've been to Le Mans have built their own car with their own name, but I think not more than total, including me, probably 3 total. I don't know of any more.
Wow. It's amazing, really. And you also had a fantastic race at the 500 kilometres Nürburgring, right?
Yes, again in the Nathan GT.
Yeah.
A red car at the time, a works car. I think we got, our time I think was something like just over 10 minutes. This was on the full circuit. And in those days there was no arm cut and stuff. I mean, it was 15, just over 14.9 mile per lap, I think.
Yeah.
Or was it kilometre? No, 14.9 mile per lap, I think.
And didn't you win outright? You won your class or something?
Won the class outright.
Won the class,
Also, we won. We were fast in all the 1300 cars as well, and got the lap record.
Wow. We touched briefly on your three favourite races. There was obviously Bath and Montlhéry.
Montlhéry. Generally, people would think that the Montlhéry race was probably my best one, but there are other races, which were club races, which were in some ways more satisfying to me because I actually had to try harder to win. And one of them was at Alton Park in the Elite, probably I would think in 1963, I would think. I raced against Derek Bennett, also had an Elite at the same time, and that was his home circuit. It was my first time there, and we were both on the front row from our practice times, and he got in front of me at the start, and I was right on his tail, lap after lap after lap. And he was quite a good driver. I was pushing him, and I learned the lesson here, and I couldn't get by him. And then, as we turned on one of the laps, past a bit, we turned right, I was really pushing him very hard, trying to find my way in front. And you could obviously see this in the mirror, I knew I was there. And he slightly overdid it, and the car went into a slide. And I didn't hesitate. I put my foot down as we were going into the corner. I just got in front. The whole thing took half a second, and I won the race. But what it taught me, and I still remember this, everyone's got their limit. You can push them so far, that eventually they'll reach the point where they won't go anymore. And if you will, that's when you win. And that's what happened at Montlhéry too.
Interesting. What about the other one?
The other one was probably the Euston Gold Cup at RAF Euston in Newcastle upon Tyne. It's an RAF airfield, and every year they open the circuit for this one race, the Euston Gold Cup. And it was a nice gold cup on its base. And I went up there with the Brabham Oldsmobile in 1965. We had a lot of trouble with that engine, unfortunately. It kept blowing up, and it was very unreliable. We had huge problems with oil surge. But when it ran, it showed that the idea of putting it in there was a good idea because it won. And it had just blown up before the race, and we rebuilt it again, and it needed running in. So what we did, or what I did, was drive all the way to Newcastle on public roads. And we had this V8 engine, it looked like a dragster, Brabham Oldsmobile, 8 chrome exhaust pipes sticking out the back, big 48, 4 of them RDA Webbers, downdrafts, the hole cut in the back deck. But of course it was summertime, June, and when it got hot, I got stuck in a traffic jam between Biggleswade and Baldock. So I had to pull over on the side and let it cool down. And then on one occasion, the police stopped me and said, so we used to do our testing on the M1, because we were based in Muswell Hill, not far from the M1. And we used to go at night on the M1 where there was no speed limit in those days, and we'd do 180 miles an hour at night, running the cars in the high top gear. I remember being pulled over by the police once and say, do you realise, sir, you're doing 180 miles an hour? I said, yes, I do, officer. And he said, well, let me see your lights. Put the lights on, because the sports cars had lights. Can we see your brake lights? Brake lights, push the brake lights worked. And they had handbrakes, so can we see your handbrake? Handbrake was there. Well, it was only the regulations on a BD8 sports car. And he's obviously trying to find something to book me on. Then he said, can I hear your horn? Well, racing cars don't have horns. What did we anticipate? I anticipated this. I mean, hand under the dash and bong, 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 one of those honking horns. And he said, God, he said, off you go. There we go. We squeezed it up a bulb. Anyway,
magic.
but get back to it. The race was I've lost track of it now. Hang on. Oh yes, that was with it, driving up to Newcastle with the Brabham running it in. So we drove all the way to Newcastle, and I found that there was a problem with one of the plugs, any one of them, it could be one of the 8, oiling up. Now, normally with the plug, if it wets up with petrol or some degree with oil, you can sometimes clear it by tickling the throttle and sort of catching it on the power with minimum throttle, and it clears. It burns it off and it clears. But in this case, it wouldn't work with this car, with this engine. It wouldn't clear. Once the plug oiled up, it stayed oiled up. So you're on 7 cylinders. You can't win. But I found out that, again, from driving up and stopping and starting, if I could load the engine straight away without it ticking over, it wouldn't oil up. It would run cleanly. So we went to Euston, went out to practice. Because we were late getting there, or working on it for some reason, I don't know what it was now, I had to start from the back of the grid. So I was sort of 36th on the grid right at the back. And I knew that if I started it, the 1 minute sign, and they blow a horn at 1 minute and they hold up a 1 minute board, everyone starts their engines, puts it in gear and gets ready to go. If I did that, the plug would certainly wet up. Oil up rather, not wet up, oil up. Oil's different. It doesn't clear so easily. So I couldn't start until the flag actually came down. So what I decided to do was, the 1 minute signal, put it into gear, and as the flag came down, start it and immediately load it and pull off, which is what I did. And it didn't oil up, it worked. I came from the back of the grid through the entire field and won the race outright.
Proper.
And I got the outright circuit record. So I won the Gold Cup with the outright circuit record and winning the race, and another cup called the Journal Trophy for winning the race itself.
Mega.
But I
Worthy.
mean, it wasn't just the cylinders. I actually had to drive it very, very hard indeed. I remember coming on one of the bends, high speed, and I thought, oh, I've ever done this. And it was doing 150 miles an hour on this long bend, and the car was going off the circuit. I just managed to hold it. So I was trying very hard, and I won it. It was very satisfying.
I'm sure, yeah. It's
So
nothing like coming from the
That was
back.
the third race I was thinking of,
Yeah, magic.
right from the back.
Yeah, a worthy top 3. So,
But what a pity. Had the engine been good during the season, I'd have beaten Jimmy Clark and McLaren and all the others.
was Clark in that race?
No, he wasn't in that race, but it showed that the car, the concept that the old engine in the back of the car
Yeah.
would have worked well.
With the
Far
aluminium.
better than the 2.5 Climax because it's an V8 engine,
Yeah.
double the power.
Yeah. So that was when you had the aluminium block?
Yes, oh yeah, only with the aluminium block from Chrysler.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically trying to sort of wrap up the racing side, going back to the Astra and Roger Nathan racing. It was after that you had enough of being a manufacturer, didn't you?
Yeah, my vocation really, I mean, I was a driver. I was not an engineer. I had no formal training in engineering. I had no degrees. And what I learned, I knew I had to learn actually doing it in the field, the hard way. And it was hard too, because it would have helped had I had a degree in engineering. It would be much easier, but it wasn't. I didn't have that anyway. So I wanted to get away from building cars and all the problems involved with them, and finding suppliers and all the parts required, having a lot of staff and places to store the car, and mechanics to put them together, and just concentrate on driving.
Because you were saying that, that the imp business, basically, the majority of the profits would just go on funding
Yes, Roger,
a significant
yeah.
portion of the profits would go on funding the race team.
That's right, Roger Nathan Racing. I mean, we win in the international races some reasonable prize money. And not a lot of money, but I mean, you might win £200, but it's better than a polyester dressing gown. And but all the money we made went back into keeping the racing car going.
Yeah.
Or the racing cars going, development costs. And also we built that twin cam imp engine, which was designed by Coventry Climax engineers. 2 of them. One was
Specifically for your
yes,
team?
yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. We had to buy all that. We employed Ron Burr. And Ron went to work for Lotus after he left Coventry Climax. He developed that Lotus, not Lotus, Vauxhall, that Vauxhall racing car, saloon car they had. What was it called? Vauxhall.
I'm not sure, no.
Some very, I think it's the fastest production car in the world at the time, a Vauxhall saloon car.
Oh, it was the Astra GTE, wasn't it?
No,
Jelly mould.
no, it was something. Anyway, whatever it was, but he designed the head along with his colleague from Climax called Claude Jeffcott. Those two designed the engine for me, all drawn, proper technical drawings, and we had to make that. That cost an awful lot of money to do.
I'm sure. I'm
So-
sure, yeah. And you had to fund that?
Yeah.
Oh, right, yeah,
That's
that's
where all the
not
money went.
insignificant. Yeah.
I mean, it became so expensive in the end, I had to drop the project. We couldn't afford to keep it going.
So you set off to just become a full-time professional driver after you
That
sort of
was-
shut down that operation?
Yeah, in 1970, I had my last race at Silverstone in the Astra. It was a Martini International. And I won the race outright again, because it's the second time. I won it first in 1964 in the Brabham, and again now with the Astra. And I got the lap record. That was on August the 15th, 1970. And I'd never raced again. Basically because I had enough of building cars, I wanted to get away from that and just drive. My feelings are I should have gone into Formula One instead of the sports car, and perhaps it relates to that. But what I found, that without sufficient finances available, I couldn't do it anymore because the prices were going up and up and up. And I couldn't make enough money from the business to actually support it. So without a sponsor, it was a no-go situation. I tried to get sponsorship, but I'm not my own best salesman. I didn't socialise very much. I didn't drink, not till I got married. And I didn't drink, so I wouldn't go and have a pint of beer with the lads. And I go to win a motor race or go to let record, and I jump in the car and drive home. But I found I couldn't actually get any sponsorship. And considering my background, what I'd achieved, I was hugely disappointed. I was still only 27, really at my peak. I could have raced another 10 years in theory.
Yeah, easily.
And I thought, I've had enough of this, and I just walked away, basically. Didn't want it wasn't easy. I wanted to carry on racing.
It's tricky. But you walked away with, what was it, 3 overall championship wins?
Autosport Championship, Motoring UGT, Total Championship, and hundreds of wins.
Hundreds.
I mean, and cups. I mean, you can see on the back of the book some of the cups here. That's just
Yeah, look at that.
and that's just these aren't all the collection. These are the ones that were left after all the challenge trophies were returned. Because having stopped racing, I couldn't defend them, so they went back.
Sure.
But I've got a couple full of pewter mugs here, which I got from the club racing.
And didn't you have the most lap records for any British
Oh
driver
yes,
at the
that's
time
right.
as
I had
well?
29 international lap records,
Wow. Yeah.
which was more than Jackie Stewart, who was world champion at the time.
Staggering. That is staggering. Yeah.
Both international and national records, virtually on every circuit in the country.
Yeah, it's awesome.
In my own cars,
Yeah.
mainly.
And I mean, even cooler. Yeah, as I say, elite company.
There'll be some with the imps, but I mean, saloon car racing really was only to generate money. I didn't particularly enjoy that. That was for the business purpose.
Sure. So it was sort of rather sort of abrupt end.
Yes, many people ask me the same question,
Yeah,
but that's how it was.
yeah. But I mean, it brings me back to my point at the beginning of the conversation. Sort of people who had a career in motorsport often have the most bonkers life outside of that as well, particularly from your generation. And yeah, it didn't stop you, did it? So the next thing was round the corner.
Well, I had to do something. I didn't want to go back into the motor business. So the next best thing to do is start flying. So I went to Elstree Aerodrome, just north of London, and signed on for the duration of a course to get my private pilot's licence. I could have gone solo after 7 hours, but because I hadn't done my medical, I did another 2 hours till the medical came through. So I actually went solo and got the licence. I went solo after 9 hours, in fact, although I could have done it in 7. And then I completed my course by May 70, starting in November 69. May 70 I got all my licences, or my licence, but that's only a basic licence, which meant I could fly during the day in good weather. So then I got a night rating, so I could fly at night. Then I got a multi-rating, which meant I could fly multi-engine aircraft as well. Then I got a thing called an IMC rating, which is like an instrument rating, but not quite as high a standard. But for my purposes, it was quite sufficient. So I could fly anywhere in the world, day or night, in any weather conditions, as long as they were safe, of course. I mean, you wouldn't want to go flying around in thunderstorms in a light aircraft, which I've done, and it's very unpleasant.
I can imagine.
It's a white knuckle job, clutching the No, I had all that. Yeah. And then I started various other things as well. I went into the property business. Oh no, first of all, I got married, didn't I? Yeah, I got married. I mustn't forget that, first time. that changed my life considerably.
I'm sure. So didn't you go, there was some, like was it a pawn shop or a gold shop?
That was to do with my first wife, Judy. What happened, I bought from the Ministry of Defence an RAF Beagle Basset when the squadron was disbanded and it was taken off charge. And it was typical of the Air Force, being completely rebuilt and refurbished, like brand new batteries, tyres, engines overhauled, props, a lot. Then they sell it for next to nothing. Waste of public money. But I bought this aircraft. The military number was XS767, X-Ray Sierra 767, and it was like a new aircraft. It was beautiful. Obviously RAF maintenance, best in the world. Had 8 seats, 2 Rolls-Royce like Continental Lycoming engines, long range, 1800-mile range, and a very good instrument platform. And I bought that and had it for many years. And when it came time to sell it, I advertised it in Flight International, which was like Autosport. Anybody interested in aeroplanes read Flight International from cover to cover. So I put an advert in there for sale, for the Beagle. I had a phone call from a chappie called Gabby. He said he was calling from Paris. And could I fly the plane to Paris as he's interested in buying it? I said, well, not really, no. I said, if you want to come to London, or come to England, you can try the plane. I'll show all the documents, all the spare parts I have. Oh, he said, I haven't got time for that. He said, I said, if you haven't got time, I said, perhaps you better give me another call when you've got time. Because in my view, if somebody wants to buy something and they haven't got time, they're not serious. I left it at that. 3 weeks later, same chap he phones back. This time he said he's in Ostend, in Belgium. And he's saying the same thing. Can I take the aircraft to Brussels so you can see it? And I said, well, Gary, I don't mean to be unhelpful, but we've been through this before. And he said, I'm very busy now. I'm opening a new freight airline in Ostend, and it's a question of time. I said, you're opening an airline, are you? He said, yes. I said, you're a pilot? He said, yes. Oh, I said, who do you work for? He said, Middle East Airlines, which was based in Lebanon, in Beirut. And I got talking to him, and I began to think, this guy knows a lot. I think he might be serious. And he's still insisting I take the plane over there. He hasn't got time again. So I thought, well, I'll give it a go. I'll fly it over there, because I do believe this guy's sincere. So I took the van, loaded up the stuff, went to Luton, where it was Leavesden. It was based at Leavesden in those days, which is now closed, just outside of, near Luton. Loaded the plane up, took off at Brussels, met Gabby at the information desk where we agreed to meet, and but they went off, had a few beers together and chatted about the plane. He never saw the plane and was parked out on the apron. But I had all the documents. He checked all the logbooks. You've got logbooks for the fuselage, the propellers, the engines. And he looked at those and he said, it's fine. He said, I'll buy it. I said, oh, okay. He hadn't seen the plane. Anyway, so I said, fine. I said, how do you want to pay for it, Gabby? Oh, he said, I'll give you some cash now, the balance by cheque. I said, yes. I said, where's the cheque drawn on? It was some bank in Brazil. I said, well, I thought it over. And I'd asked him, I said, what do you do? And he said he was a senior pilot for Middle East Airlines. He was and he had number 4 license in Lebanon. He was the 4th person to be licensed as an airline pilot. And it turned out he used to go to Toulouse to get the caravels and deliver them back to Lebanon, because they used to fly caravels in those days, built by the French.
Right.
So I thought, well, he seems to be trustworthy. I said, okay. I said, that's fine. Then he said to me, can you do me a favour? I said, well, if I can, yes. I said, what is it? He said, I want to meet my wife and my son-in-law to be in Nice. He said, can you fly me down to Nice after we finish here, when we finish our business? I looked at him and he said, oh, you'll be on expenses, and I'll pay you a fare back to the UK. And I thought, that's fine, because that gives me time then to go to the bank in the airport, especially present the cheque. And I got some cash anyway, and I still got control of the aeroplane, and I like it, and be interested to fly with Gabby. Because he was hugely experienced. He was 44 years old, and he had 24,000 hours in his logbook. That's a huge amount of hours. I mean, people spend their life in the Air Force and log up about 2,000 or 3,000 hours.
It's crazy.
So, obviously a very interesting guy, and it had to be a good pilot. So, yeah, I'll take you to Nice, that's fine. So we took off, and we landed at Nice about 1 o'clock in the morning. Met his wife and his son-in-law there, and we had a pizza. And during the meal, he said to me, can you help me a bit more tomorrow? Oh, I said, if I can, Gabby, what do you want to do? He said, can you fly me to Athens with my wife and my future son-in-law? So I thought, he said, oh, he said, same deal. You'll be on expenses, and I'll cover all your fare back to the UK. I thought, great, more time for the cheque to clear, another couple of days or whatever it takes. And it was very interesting flying with him, so I was learning a lot. A bit like when I was driving with Brabham testing that day. What I learned with Brabham in that half a day, I hadn't learned in 2 years before by myself. So I thought it was a good opportunity to learn more. And he was a nice guy, he was friendly. I said, yeah, fine, we can go to Athens, no problem. So again, early takeoff, we were on the runway at dawn, the sun's coming up, and take off east into the direction of the sun, and flying along, and then we stop at Naples to refuel, and take off again. And that's more than it sounds, because the time you join the circuit and you land and you taxi for fuel, and the fuel truck comes and you go and pay the control tower, the landing fee, and then you take off again. It takes a couple of hours. It's not a 2-minute job. Like stopping at a petrol pump to fill your car. It's quite tiring. And he wouldn't fly the plane. I offered to let him fly several times, and he said no. He said, I said, well, why don't you want to fly it? He said he's forbidden by his company to fly anything that they don't own. So he wouldn't touch it. So I was doing all the flying. Anyway, so we got to Athens, and I was quite tired by then, because I'd flown the previous night all the way to Nice, and all day long to get to Athens with the fuel stop at Naples. I just wanted to go to bed, have a shower, go to bed and sleep. And he said, no, he said, come down to the bar. He said, I didn't want to appear to be antisocial or ungrateful. He said, okay, I'll just freshen up and come down. Which I did. Got down to the bar. The name of the hotel was the Vula Beach Hotel. And that's where all the Middle East airline crew stayed. So obviously he stayed there because he was the senior pilot for Middle East Airlines. It also turned out he was a personal pilot of King Hussein of Jordan. Wow. He used to fly the King 707 about. He showed me a lovely picture when we eventually got where we were going of him and the King together in the cockpit. Their little moustaches, they look quite similar actually. Anyway, so went down to the bar. I saw him sitting at the bar, and he's got this gorgeous young lady sitting next to him. She was a real cracker, my goodness me. About 19 years old, lovely looking girl, beautiful figure, pretty face. And he said, here you are. And he said, let me introduce you to this young lady. This is Judy, this is English Captain Roger. And she said, hello, how are you? So she said, sit down. So she sat in the middle, I sat next to her. Gabby, she was in the middle, Gabby on the other side. I'm chatting to her, and she spoke 5 languages fluently. English, Arabic, French, which most of the Lebanese do, they're trilingual. Turkish and Armenian, because she was originally Armenian from parents. They left there during when the Turks committed genocide on the Armenian people, which not many people seem to know about. But they killed about a million Armenians.
Jesus.
In World War I, during World War I period.
No idea.
Oh yeah, well, I didn't either. But they don't like they hate the Turks, the Armenians.
Well,
anyway, so let's not get into politics. I thought, what a fascinating girl, and she told me a joke, a dirty joke, as it happens. I wasn't used to hearing dirty jokes from girls, because English girls were quite sort of, not dull in comparison, that's not right, but should we say more polite, with a sense of in the humorous sense. Anyway, I thought, what an interesting young lady. So I said, look, I shall be coming back this way shortly, and if you're still here, I'd like to see you again. So she said, okay. Then Gary said to me, during that evening, in fact, but earlier, he said, can we? He said he'd like to go. Can I do the same thing tomorrow and go to Cyprus? He wanted to go to Larnaca. So I thought, yeah, so I was enjoying myself. I'm reading these, I'm getting paid. I'm meeting these wonderful women. This wonderful woman. I'm learning a huge amount from Gabby. It's great company. I'm being fed and looked after. Oh yes, we'll go to Cyprus, certainly. More time for the cheque to clear. Another day. Great. That's why I said to Judy, I'm going to come back this way. Can I see you again? Anyway, next morning, again very early, we take off, set course across the Med towards Cyprus. And I've called up Cyprus, and I've told them we're inbound, and they've given me landing instructions, and we're about sort of 20 miles out. Then he suddenly said to me, he said, mumbling on the telephone, on the intercom, and I said, I'm sorry, what is it? I can't understand what you said, Gabby. He said, I'd like to go a bit further, not to Larnaca. I said, I've just told Larnaca we're going to land there. We got our instructions. And he said, I said, where do you want to go? He said, oh, a bit hesitantly, further east. I think further east, you've got Turkey next, then you've got Russia. Where does the man want to go? I said, where do you want to go? And he said, to Lebanon, to Beirut. And this was the time they had the war on there.
Oh, yeah.
And the Syrians were invading through the Bekaa Valley. I said, we can't go to Lebanon. I said, first of all, the airport's been closed for 9 months, and there's no other airfield there we can land on. I said, where are we going to land? Then he said, well, he's working with the Christian militia, and they prepared this special landing strip just north of Beirut at a place called Juni.
And was this always part of his plan, to tell you in the air?
Well, he needed to get the aircraft to Lebanon somehow, and he couldn't do it.
But he intended to tell you when you were halfway there, basically, yes.
Well, when I was nearly there,
Yeah.
not when I was committed.
Yes.
So I thought, well, I was thinking about this, a war going on. I thought, I haven't flown in the war zone before, it might be interesting. And he's got his wife, in the back and his son-in-law, so I thought, it can't be that risky, otherwise he wouldn't have done this with his family. So, and again, I was still enjoying myself. And then another day, more time for the check to clear, and I still got control of the aircraft. So I said, okay, well, we'll go. Now I know there's a landing place here. I said, but what do we do about Larnaca? He said, call them up, tell them that we want to refile to Damascus. And when they've accepted that, we'll drop below 1,000 feet to get off their radar, so they won't know where we're going. So I said, I called up Larnaca, I said, we've changed of flight plan, want to refile for Damascus. Thank you very much and goodbye. Anyway, we dropped down to 1,000 feet. We've changed heading now to just north of Beirut, flying at 1,000 feet over the ocean. And it's not very far, it's only about a 40-minute flight to get to Lebanon. And you can see the mountains in the distance as we got closer, rising up to about 6,000 feet. It's an interesting place because you can swim in the water there, in the sea, in the morning, because the weather's very good. And you go up the mountain in the afternoon, you go skiing in the afternoon. That's the climate conditions are ideal for it there. It's very unusual. Anyway, as we get closer, he said, now look, he said, aim between those two peaks and keep it on this heading, and don't go to the south at all, because you're liable to get a rocket from the rebels in the airport in Beirut, and don't go to the north because you'll have a Syrian MiG after us. So I thought, oh dear, this sounds a bit risky. I've done the right thing. Anyway, and I thought, well, but by this time I told him I'd go, and if I said something, I will do it. Even if it's detrimental, I will still do it, because I gave him my word. I don't like to let people down. So And also, I must admit, I was rather enjoying the challenge. Doing something new and exciting. So, as we get close, he says, fly over the town of Juney. And Juney was a place where all the arrows went, particularly at Christmas time, or they're going on holiday, because they go and they charter a 747 to take a dozen people or their family with them to America or somewhere and have a good time. They had a massive casino there. It was like really the Monte Carlo of the Middle East, Juney. And then they could drink there, they could go with women there, which they couldn't do in Saudi or anywhere else in the Middle East. Anyway, so I said, yes, okay. As we get closer, he said, fly over the town and then look at the airfield and orientate yourself for a landing. I said, okay, fine. So I'm down to about 500 feet, I'm flying along. I notice as we cross the coast, there's a road running along the coast, south to north, which branches off to the town of Juney, and on a right angle bend. And right on this bend, there's quite a big concrete building, 4 or 5 story building, which looked like some sort of electricity installation, a big blockhouse of some sort, power station or something. Anyway, I'm flying over the town, and just the other side of town, you've got the mountains going up to 6,000 feet, very close to the town. So you couldn't go too far because of the mountain. And I've circled over the town, got the thing banked over, I'm looking down, looking for this airfield he's talking about. I couldn't see it. So I said, I've got to go around again. He said, why? I said, well, I haven't seen the airfield yet. He said, we're right over it. He said, it's down there. So I looked down again. It suddenly occurs to me, what he's talking about as an airfield is this bloody this road from the sea going into the town, off the main road. This right angle branch off the main road, the coastal road. I'm looking at it, I said, it can't land there. I said, how long is it? He said, it's something like 2,600 feet. So I quickly pulled out the RAF manual from the side pocket, and bearing in mind we took on a full load of fuel at Athens, we had all the spares on board, plus the passengers, we were heavy. And according to the RAF manual, it's not possible to land in 2,600 feet. I said, we can't do it, Gabby. I said, the manual said it can't be done. And also, because the mountains were very close to the end of the inside end of the road, the town end, it meant we couldn't get low enough to land into wind towards the sea because the wind was coming from the sea. Because you always take off land into wind, not with it. Mm. So it meant I had to land from the sea, which made it even worse. So I have a downwind wind. Anyway, so he said, well, you can do it. He said, I know you can. I said, well, how do you know that? And what he'd been doing, as we were coming along and stopping at various airfields, he was looking at the markers and he was asking me to take off now with maximum power on the shortest possible distance and do the same when you stop. Which I thought he was just interested in seeing what the plane would do. But he had this in mind, obviously, that this runway was short, and he wanted to make sure the plane would actually land and take off there. Clever.
Yeah.
He said, it can be done. And I thought, well, he's on board. If he says it can be done, it should be possible. Bearing in mind his experience is far greater than mine, I'll have to go along with him. So I said, okay. So what I did, now I knew where the runway was, circled around again, went out to sea, came in very low, going down to about 200 feet, and at the slowest possible speed with a nose up attitude, 15 degrees of flap, just above the stall. I had to be very careful. 4 or 5 knots, you lose that and the thing would just drop out the sky. And there wouldn't be enough room to recover. So I had quite a lot of power going along the nose up. But what concerned me was this big concrete building right on the bend at the start of the road. So I couldn't go down until I passed over that building, which meant I had even less time to go down. Instead of making a long approach and landing on the tip of the runway, I had to get over this building first, then let down, which made it even worse. So I'm down now to about, 100 feet. I'm looking down, waiting for this building to pass under the wing. I couldn't see ahead because I had the nose up. So when I swept past under the wing, closed both throttles, and the thing just dropped like a brick. I thought, unless I do something, we're going to smash on that runway and crash. Opened both throttles, full power for about 2 seconds, and eased them back and stopped. And it just settled down. I just caught it right. It just settled down nicely on the 2 main wheels, put the nose wheel down, and put the brakes on. But we're hurtling down this narrow road. It wasn't very wide. There were pylons both sides carrying electrical cables and telephone poles and wires. There's sentry boxes all over the place with guys with Kalashnikovs over their shoulders, and they're flashing by both wings, and then I've got the brakes on, it's slowing down, and then Gary suddenly said, we're not stopping, because the barrier's coming up the end, the runway's finishing. There's a big arm barrier across the end. And this is coming up very quick. And I said, it is stopping. But it wasn't, the brakes were fading because of the pressure and the heat, because it's very hot there. So I started to pump the brakes to keep the pressure up, and we stopped 30 feet short of the barrier. And the brakes were steaming, smoke was coming out, it was boiling hot, Gabby was covered in sweat. And next thing I knew, hundreds of people were running towards the aeroplane from all directions. Mainly armed in military fatigues with Kalashnikovs, grenades on their belt and hip holsters and things. And they were running towards us. And so the first thing I thought of is the props are still turning, and you can't see them. People can run into the props, especially children, because there were children there as well. So I immediately shut down both engines so we didn't chop anybody in pieces. Next thing I knew, two military guys had opened the door, they were hauling us out and putting us on their shoulders and cheering us. We were the first plane to land there since the airport closed 9 months before. We were treated as heroes. They took us to a lovely restaurant on the side of the marina for lunch.
And the intention of the whole exercise?
Well, the intention was, Gavin asked me again if I can stay on, because he wanted to start a ferry service to take out certain people who couldn't leave by boat because A, it was too risky, and there was pirates involved as well, piracy. And it took a long time, it took about 9 hours by boat for some reason. And he wanted to start an air bridge to Cyprus. And would I start it up for him?
But hang on, you'd only flown over there from England to sell him a plane.
Yeah.
And however long, I mean, how long after that are we now in Lebanon?
Well, so we flew from the afternoon to midnight to get to Nice. The next day, all day to get to Athens. So we're on the third day now.
And people back home are thinking...
I don't know what they're thinking. Well, with me, they wouldn't think they could let me get on with it.
Take the plane off again.
Well, that's another drama. Anyway, so we had a very nice lunch, and he took me to his flat, and he said we'll stay in my flat, and I saw this. That's where I saw the picture of him and the King in the King's Boeing 707. He said, having a couple of days break, and then he said, I'm going to assemble some passengers now, we're going to fly out. So we need to be ready within a couple of days. Meanwhile, he had the Middle East airline engineers who were out of a job because the airport was closed. They were servicing the aircraft, and they were very good actually, because the heater packed up when we took off from Nice. It was freezing cold up there, 8,000 feet. It was late autumn. So they overhauled the heater, got that working for us, which was good. Not that we needed it during the day, but they were good engineers anyway. And I had spares on board, and so I had the parts they needed for the repair. So I said, fine, but what we need to do, Gary, because the takeoff is going to be difficult again, let's start in the morning early when it's still reasonably cool, sort of 9 o'clock. But, with the Lebanese, the time they wake up and they have their morning coffee and their cakes and things, and it was lunchtime till they were ready to go. So I got to the airfield about 12 o'clock, and there's this fellow standing on the runway wearing a black pinstripe city suit with a bowler hat. It looked strange. It's in a dusty airstrip out in the Middle East, wearing that suit. And this fellow's name, I won't mention his name, but he was a very wealthy individual who wanted to fly his family out to Larnaca. And they had all sorts of boxes and various things they wanted on board. So we were fully loaded, and it was the hottest time of the day, 1 o'clock. So I thought, well, we hadn't tried to take off before. I said, what we had to do, we had to get the militia to push the aircraft back so the tailplane is almost touching the barrier, so we've got every possible yard of space. And the thing with the Beagle, it didn't have contra-rotating props. They both turned anti-clockwise, which meant that when you gave it full power at the start, the plane would veer to the left. And what you'd have to do is use the right brake, right foot on the rudder bar, to just dab the right brake to straighten it up. until you got to about 60 knots when the rudder began to have effect on the aerodynamics. You could use the rudder without touching the brakes, because every time you touch the brakes, you lose 2 or 3 knots. And we couldn't afford to do that.
No.
So I decided to start off with 0 flap, on full power 0 flap. And I didn't want to use the brakes at all. So militia left, full power, started going on the wrong way, started to veer to the left, and I sort of stood, without touching the brakes, I pushed the hill bar of the rudder because it turned the nose wheel slightly as well. But it was very hard to do. You're not supposed to do that, except when you're parking. So I'm almost standing in the seat, pushing this right rudder bar to keep the aircraft straight, and the speed built up. It got to 60 knots, and then the rudder began to take effect, so I didn't worry about the brakes. But this time we used up a good portion of runway. And what you normally do at 60 knots, you'd raise the nose wheel, so you're on the 2 mains, and at 80 knots, you'd lift off. So we're now waiting for the indicator, the airspeed, the ASI airspeed indicator, to go around to 80 knots so we can lift off. But meanwhile, this building at the end there is getting bigger and bigger in the windscreen. And we've got to 70 knots, you know, and Gavin's saying, I hear him shouting down the headphones, lift off, lift off. I said, no. I said, it's too soon, we can't lift off now. Because what would have happened if I listened to him? If we had lifted off, it would have lifted off, but it would have come down again. Then that was it. Then you wouldn't have a chance. That would be the end of it. Because at the end of the runway, there was this huge blockhouse and great big boulders, which were sea wave breakers. So they'd have smashed into these rocks. And we were beyond the point of stopping. There was no point of no return. We couldn't stop, impossible. So we were committed. So I wouldn't take off. I said, if we took off at 78 knots or 70, it would come down. We had to get 80 knots at least. And then by this time, Gabby is bathing in sweat. The passengers behind her having their cake and coffee, totally oblivious to what's going on up front. Gabby's sitting there, and I'm looking at this airspeed needle, willing it to go into 80 knots. And now this building is really large, it's huge in the mirror. It gets to 80 knots. I lift it up, pull the stick back, lift off. It's got to about 6 feet. Then it sort of stabilised. It didn't continue to climb. Oh, bloody hell, I thought, it was going to come down, which would have been the end. But it didn't come down, it stabilised. But by this time, now, I had to turn left at minimal feet high to avoid this building. So I've turned left, I've got the undercarriage up, and I've started to turn left, and it's gradually gaining height. And we got through that. That was the first takeoff there.
You didn't use any flaps? What?
No. What did I did use flap once I got to 60 knots. Yeah. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Yeah, I put them down to 15 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But didn't you later go on to do that at night?
Yeah. Oh, what? That was our trial takeoff.
Yeah.
With a plane load of passengers and all the baggage. And we got to Larnaca and had a nice meal there. And then we came back empty, of course, and landed there. And this became, in fact, he asked me to stay on to continue there until he could find somebody else I could train for him to take over. For the guy to take over. So
but this was always his intention, to get you to fly him out there? Or was it just so happened that you got on?
Well, I think it was his intention to get an aircraft out there that wasn't too expensive or too big, that could land on that runway. And the Beagle fitted his requirements.
And it just so happened that his family members were picked up along the way?
Once he bought the plane, he obviously arranged them to meet him at Nice. And whether he thought of it beforehand or it developed that way, I don't know.
Right.
But I think he had it planned from the beginning.
Hilarious.
That's what you call thinking
We stumbled
ahead.
across the right bloke, didn't we?
Yeah, the right nutter.
Yeah. But then, so obviously you then went back to go and do that multiple times. So you developed a relationship there.
Yes, he asked me to stay on, as I say, till we could find someone else to replace me. And we ended up doing it at night.
Yeah, crazy.
Did you land there at night?
Well, I did, yeah.
But not fully laden. I mean, what did you do about the brakes?
No, we had all these things to do. There was people going backwards and forwards. A lot of wealthy people out there wanted to get out.
And that was it. Was that
Because there's a big Christian community in Lebanon, you know. It's not all Muslims.
was that what it was about then? It was about getting people out
People
of the...
and their personals out.
Wow.
The irony is it's happening right now as we're speaking.
Yeah.
Lebanon getting people out.
So I mean, we do sort of have to sort of start wrapping it up a bit. But you did. You went on to have your own company out in Africa.
Yeah, just to take you back a step.
Yeah.
About landing there at night. Same thing basically, except they had two cars facing each other either side of the runway or the road at night with the headlights on.
With the headlights
So
on.
I just come in
Jesus.
looking for this pinpoint of light in the distance and aim for that pinpoint of light. Because you couldn't do it on instruments. No instruments there. No landing systems.
Christ, that's insane.
And the same taking off. You've got the light bar there going across the end of the runway. Lift off.
See the big building that you have to
Right, yeah, I knew it was there, so I avoided it.
And with obviously multiple people on board.
People on board, yeah, I
Yeah.
can't remember how many now, but we went backwards and forwards several times. And then he found a Jordanian pilot called Joseph El Oster, nice young fella, and he asked me to train him, so we flew to Rhodes and we did our training at Rhodes and to give him a conversion onto the Beagle. He unfortunately killed himself. He flew into a mountain somewhere, I think in Saudi, not in the Beagle, another aircraft some years later, but he was a nice guy, I could have been friends with him.
Actually, significantly, there was obviously the girl back at the bar.
Oh, yes. Yes, that's a good point, a very important point.
I was waiting to get Judy.
Yeah, Judy.
Judy.
So while I was in Lebanon, all I could think about was Judy, apart from the flying, of course, which came first, as usual, like the motor racing, women came second. And I thought, I must get hold of this girl, I must see her again. I was fixated with her. But there were no telephones. There was obviously no way you could reach her. Because there were only landlines and they were all down. Yeah. And there was no postal service or anything else. So you couldn't communicate outside. So I just hoped that when I got back there, she'd still be in that hotel. I was fretting about this. So when it was time to go back, Joseph El Oster, we flew back together. He dropped me at Athens airport and flew off himself back to Beirut. I jumped into a taxi, rushed to the Vula Beach Hotel, hoping she'd still be there. I went to reception. I said, "Is Miss So-and-so still here?" And he said, "Yes, she's still here, but she's not in at the moment." I said, "Thank goodness for that." I thought, okay. I said, "Do you mind if I wait in the lounge till she comes back?" He said, "No." I sat down in the lounge, and I'm sitting there, can't wait to see her. About an hour later, I see her coming in through the doors. She's walking into the hall. I jump up and run to her, and I said, "Hello." I said, "How are you?" For want of, I wasn't very switched on the women in those days. I was too involved in motor racing and other things. And she looked at me in a sort of distasteful way. She said, "Who are you? What do you want?" And I felt about that big. Because I assumed, because I fancied her, I assumed for some stupid reason, or perhaps it was conceit, that she felt the same about me. She even forgot my name. Didn't know who I was. So I had to remind her. Anyway, that was a girl I eventually ended up getting married to, my first wife.
That's magic. Magic. Bonkers story.
Well, there's more to it, but I don't think we've got time to go in more detail. But anyway, you got the gist of it.
Absolutely, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, aviation led to more things. Africa, for a start.
Yes, yeah. Well, it didn't actually lead to Africa. It was used for Africa at a later stage. What led me to Africa was Judy. The car business had closed down, so my father retired. I didn't want to go back into cars. And she suggested I get a shop for her, and she could buy gold as scrap, because the gold price had risen from sort of $50 as it was in the old days up to $1,000 in 1979, as high as it's ever been. So people were selling gold, jewellery, as scrap. We buy it on weight, and they were selling it for scrap value. So she would buy the gold during the day in the shop, and sell it at night and get a quick profit.
And this is just in England, this?
This is in England, yeah. So I found a shop for her on the Edgware Road, and I bought the lease of the shop and set her up in that. And she was actually making more money in the car business by herself in one day compared to a day, because some days you didn't sell cars.
Yeah.
But she was making money every day regularly, and substantial amounts from this scrap gold. I mean, we had hundreds of thousands of pounds invested in cars, and we were making more money with nothing invested in the shop, apart from the lease. Because you start off with no stock, and stock will come in during the day, and you sell it at night for, I don't know, 10, 12% profit.
Staggering.
It was a good, excellent business.
Yeah.
So a lot of the people that came in were from Africa, mainly some from Ghana, but mainly from Sierra Leone. And they brought in this gold either in little nugget bars of gold they melted down, or in dust form, alluvial gold they got from the riverbeds. So I said to one of them one day, "Are you happy with the price we're giving you?" And they said, "Yes, we're happy." And I said, "Where did you get this gold?" They said, "We get it from the villages up country in Sierra Leone." And I said, "Can you make it? Are you making a profit?" They said, "Yeah, we're happy." So I thought, well, the obvious thing to do here is go to Sierra Leone, cut out the middleman, and get the gold direct from the villages, or wherever it comes from. I knew nothing about mining at all. I had no idea about mining. I don't think I even knew what alluvial mining was compared to hard rock or underground mining. So we decided, it was Christmas time 1982, I think, and we were thinking of going to Inverlochy Castle for Christmas. So it was either Inverlochy Castle or Sierra Leone. So needless to say, we chose Sierra Leone. It was a logical thing to do because it's a possible new business, and it's a bit Scotland's very nice, but a bit chilly, and there's no business there except spending, because Inverlochy Castle wouldn't be cheap. So we went to Sierra Leone, and she, being Lebanese, or Armenian Lebanese, oh, by the way, she was a senior stewardess in Middle East Airlines, and she would be appointed to the Arabs as a personal stewardess because of her languages and her character and her personality. So she get all these luxurious flights, charter flights. So she had contacts in Sierra Leone, because the Lebanese have a big, the Sierra Leoneans have a big Lebanese community there. They mainly control the financial side of business in Sierra Leone, all owned by Lebanese. So we went there for a flight, Christmas time I think it was, and we were met at the airport, got the ferry across from the airport to the mainland, which is another story because of what I want to do next. It's the old government ferry, which is a horrible old barge, about 60 years old. You drive the car on it, it goes about 4 or 5 knots across 10 miles of water, it takes nearly an hour. And land on the mainland. And then we took a guide, a Mercedes, which was lent to us by one of her Lebanese contacts there, and a driver, of course. And we drove to a place called Tonkolili. I renamed it Auntie Lily, but it was Tonkolili really. So we drove to Tonkolili, which is a main area for gold production. And the guide said, well, we need to go and see the paramount chief first to get permission to talk to the villagers before they'll let us do any business there. I said, fine, let's go and see the paramount chief. And I thought this might happen. So what I did in London was come out with a box full of very flash imitation Rolex and Omega watches. And they look fantastic, good imitation watches. I had a box of those. Went into the chief's hut. It wasn't a house, it was actually a hut in the village. I remember he had 2 big gold teeth here and a bad throat, which he'd been operated on. And we went in the hut with a guide, and the chief, he, after greeting us, he sort of turned his back and sat down. And everybody went silent. So I'm looking around and nothing's happening. And I looked at the guide, and the guide's saying, give him something. I said, yeah, okay, fine. So I said, give me that box over there. Open up the box full of his imitation watches. I said, Chief, I brought you a gift from London. And he turned around, he saw these gleaming watches there, and his face lit up. His whole countenance changed, the whole atmosphere changed. And he shows his watch, and I immediately got permission to go and deal with the people. Anyway, so we went out, and the people saw us there. And I bought in Hatton Garden some balancing scales, so I could weigh the gold, and some acid to test it with, which I read the instructions so we could test it. But Judy had some knowledge of this anyway. And we began buying gold from the villagers in little parcels, mainly in dust form, which was from the river. They get it in a pan. They have a thing called a calabash, which is like a gold pan, except like a lemon skin, and they use it as a gold pan to wash the dirt out and pick up the gold. But it was very time consuming, and we had to bargain with each one. And they all had radios, so they could get the gold price on the BBC every morning. And then the problem with them was, we had to explain to them why we couldn't buy it at that BBC price. I said, because it's not pure gold, that's refined gold. Of course, they had no understanding of that. So a lot of the people in the village, they were illiterate. But they're not stupid. You mustn't, you don't misunderstand them. So it was very difficult to buy it at a competitive price, and it was very time consuming arguing with each one for a small quantity of gold. So I then said, well, this is not going to work. I said, this is, it's all very interesting, but it's not a practical proposition at all. You're travelling in the bush with lots of money, because we had to take a big sack full of cash. You can't give them cheques. Big bag full of money, and we were driving around on Mercedes with gold and cash. It's not safe. And it's very time consuming. We couldn't get a big enough quantity without spending days on site. And there's nowhere to stay there. It wasn't very convenient. No decent hotels. In fact, no hotels. So I said to the villagers, I said, where did you get this gold? Can you show me? So they took me to the riverside, and you've got maybe 100 men digging gravel out the river banks, the women with their skirts sort of rolled up, and with this calabash thing like a gold pan, the men shoving the gravel in, the women wash it carefully. They're better than the men, they're more thorough. The men tend to wash it too quickly, and the gold gets washed out with the waste instead of keep it staying in the pan. So and then they get the gold and they put it in little cigarette papers and save it. So I thought, well, the obvious thing here to do, forget about doing it by hand, is open a mechanised mining operation, alluvial mining operation. So we knocked that on the head because it obviously wasn't going to work, and came back to London. And I went to Imperial College in Kensington, South Kensington. I saw the head of the geology department there, a professor. He's still there actually, South African guy. And I said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to start this mining operation. I know nothing about it. Can you put me in touch with a suitable mining engineer and geologist that can set me up or help me get set up? Which he did. A lovely old fellow, an old colonial boy called Derek George Warner Norris. Lovely old boy, smoked a pipe. And he lived quite close to me in Hampstead, and I lived in Highgate. So we met up on a Sunday, had a few beers, got on very well. So I put him on a 3-month contract to come out to Sierra Leone with me. And we spent those 3 months tramping around the jungle and bush, with him sort of planning for gold in various rivers like the Pampana and the Baffy River and the Eastern Province, and living in the bush and going through the village to village trying to find good areas to mine.
And was this around the same sort of time when you lived in a tent?
Yeah.
For 6 months?
Yeah. That came later.
Was it?
Because when Derek's contract finished after 3 months, he went back and he wrote a report. On the basis of that report, I started a dredging operation. This is what he recommended: getting a mechanical dredge, which obviously floated on the river. And we decided on the plot 15 on the Baffy River in the Eastern Province of Congo, which is a diamond area as well as gold. So then I came back to London. I ordered a dredge in California from California, and then I went out with that dredge, again with Derek, to start the operation. And basically, when Derek went back, I stayed on, and I had this tent which I bought in Holborn, big green tent, set up on the side of the Baffy River, which was my home, an office. And the problem there were things like mambas and a lot of cobras and vipers. I remember a snake came in the tent one day. You've never seen people move so fast in your life.
Jeez.
We got out of that tent so quick you wouldn't believe it. I mean, these cobras, they were thicker than the man's arm and 6 feet long. And they sort of get out and they hiss with this evil hissing noise. Horrible things.
Oh, dreadful, yeah.
Oh. But actually the worst thing are the mosquitoes, because it was malarial.
Mm.
So it wasn't, it wasn't the... And you couldn't...
You had to be keen, didn't you?
Anyway, you had to be either keen or stupid.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. I was learning all the time.
Yeah.
In the end, I found that the mining theft was a problem. You had to watch all the time. And when we were there, unless you watch continuously, they will steal, obviously. I mean, the local people had nothing, and they will steal. We pay them wages, of course, but they were in the habit of stealing. I mean, and so they had to be watched. And I found that in the hot afternoons, because we always washed afterwards when it got cooler in the evening, with the heat and they're going round and round with this pan, it sort of hypnotised you, made me sleep. I couldn't stay awake to watch them.
And did it turn out to be a beneficial exercise, a profitable exercise in comparison to the London shop in the current system?
No, it wasn't that profitable because the dredge didn't do what the manufacturer said it would do.
Right.
And it was manufactured by a company, I went and named them in California. So I stopped the operation because we clearly there was something wrong because Derek's figures didn't tell you the gold we were getting. It was far less than it should have been. And this was because the dredge wasn't processing the material they said it would do. So I wrote to them and they didn't want to know, so I sued them in California.
No way.
And they settled out of court, yeah. Quite a large amount, yeah. Well, we were getting ready to go out there, in fact, with Derek. He was a wonderful witness. I mean, if you saw Derek and spoke to him, you know, it was like speaking to God Almighty when it came to mining. He was a lovely man, nice fellow, and clearly, plainly, very honest and straight. And the judge would have believed him. But we didn't go because they settled out of court. I then decided if I'm going to do another dredging operation, I'm going to see the dredge working before I buy it. So I found another firm in what was British Guyana in South America. Flew out to Georgetown, met the manufacturer there in Georgetown, a fellow called George, funnily enough. He was a white man, and he built these very big dredges. And I said, well, I want to see one working before I buy it. So he then said, well, we can go upriver. It'll take us 2 days in my open boat, in my motorboat, to get upriver, where you can see them working. So with that, he packed a revolver and some ammunition, and we jumped in his boat and went up the Mazaruni River. And we slept on the riverbank overnight, and I was eaten alive by mosquitoes. It was awful, far worse than Sierra Leone. It was humid, and you take a shower there, and once you got yourself dry, by the time you walked downstairs, you were covered in sweat again. Very uncomfortable. Anyway, I saw these dredges working upstream, way upstream. And divers going down about 100 feet, some of them, with a pipe in their mouth, with compressed air.
Jesus.
Yes. What? Oh yeah, and health and safety, forget it. Dear, oh dear. They were getting gold. And it was far, this dredge was much bigger. It had a massive, great 6-cylinder diesel engine, turbocharged diesel engine. You know, the thing was 20 feet long compared to the thing I got in California. It was like having a pedal bike compared to a Honda Gullwing. You know, huge difference. So I said, right, we'll have it. So we couldn't ship it directly across, as no ship was going directly from South America. It had to come through Harwich first and re-ship from Harwich on another ship and sent out to Freetown. And it was, when it left Freetown, I was up country waiting for it, and my team were in Freetown to unload it from the docks, where they had big cranes, of course. It's a big port in Freetown. We used that during the Falklands War. Massive port. It's one of the 6 deepest seaports in the world. Anyway, so all the dredge and all the stuff was piled on a long, low loader in 3 levels. So it was about sort of 15, 20 feet high, and this thing went up country. It took about 3 days to get it there. And then they parked on the road near the site. And I sat and looked at this lot, and I thought, how the hell are we going to unload it? And how do you unload things which weigh several tons, 15 feet up in the air, without a crane?
Beats me.
Problems. I sat down there for about 3 hours and just looked at this thing, wondering what we're going to do. And the lorry driver came up and said, I need to be back. He said, it's going to cost you extra money otherwise. I said, well, we can't get it unloaded. So he just shrugged his shoulders and walked off. Anyway, then I found out that there was an army unit of engineers who in the area who were going to remake the road for a presidential visit. So I thought, well, they must have machines. So I went to see the captain. Captain Williams, his name was, with a bottle of whiskey. And we had a bottle of whiskey. And then we became good friends. And he had a rapier crane, mobile crane. I said, Captain, can you lend me your crane? I said, I'll pay you. And he said, how much? So we agreed a figure. So I now have my mobile crane, which came down with 6 men, to unload off this low loader. And then the next problem was to get it to the site, which was about 2 miles inland through the jungle from the road, the riverside. So we're out in the bush here, I'm in the middle of nowhere. And I had no vehicles apart from my personal transport. So I had to go back and see Captain Williams again. And I said, Captain, oh, we've got a bit of a problem here. I said, we've got the goods unloaded thanks to you, but we now need to get inside the bush, to the riverside. Which meant another negotiation for a a grader, which would clear the way, and a low loader, a smaller low loader to use. So I got those as well. Then we found, after we got in about half a mile, there was a small stream. It wasn't very wide, maybe about 10, 12 feet, but it was mud. And that small stream, to get across that was a major drama. It was like a swamp. I mean, you couldn't cross it without building a bridge. So then they had to cut down trees and make a log bridge. And then they had to tie the logs together so they wouldn't open up when the vehicles went over them. And it all done. There were no machines there. There were no electric saws and things. I had it all done by hand. Wow. It took a long time. It actually took 3 weeks to get the stuff from the road to the campsite. And when we got to the village, there's a small village there with some mud houses and a tin roof, and it wasn't a road, it was just a track. I mean, because the low loader was quite long, it wouldn't go around this corner where the house was. So we then had to negotiate with the man to knock part of his house down so we could get around the corner. So he agreed he would lose one room for X amount of money, leons. So we paid him his leons, and then we demolished part of his house so we could get the low loader around the corner. It just goes on and on and on.
Oh,
but anyway, we got there. We built the dredge. My motor racing experience came in very useful with the mechanical side for putting this dredge together, because we had to then get the engine, which came from England. I bought the engine in England, this big diesel engine, onto the dredge on the riverbank without the crane again. So that was another challenge. So we had to build an earth ramp and get a winch and drag it up this winch onto the back of onto the pontoons, which are about 5 feet high.
Crikey.
But and all I had was a Honda generator, a power drill, and a box full of tools. But I managed it with my mechanical experience and motor racing. It came in useful.
I'm sure. And was it more successful, this operation?
Oh, it's much better. Yeah. We got quite a lot of gold. But it wasn't easy. It was hard work. You're out in the sun all day long from 8 in the morning until 6 at night when it began to get dark by 7. And you got mosquitoes there, you got snakes, you got the ever-present problem of theft unless you're washing everything all day long, all the time. But I found out that because it was a diamond area, I suddenly realised that for the same amount of effort and fuel costs for running the dredge, I could be mining diamonds for the same cost as gold. And diamonds are worth far more than gold, as you know. So I then modified the dredge so that it would catch diamonds, because to catch the gold we had about a 20-foot long sluice box, 6 feet wide, which floated on in between the two pontoons. I mean, all this had to be made up and fixed together. It wasn't easy. But a sluice box won't catch diamonds because the specific gravity of gold is heavier, and the gold will sink in between the riffles, whereas the diamonds would just roll over the end.
And you could mine them in the same places?
Yeah, because some areas, not all areas, but this particular site had gold and diamonds in the same gravels.
Wow.
So it made sense to modify the dredge, stop working for a bit, modify the dredge, and I could catch diamonds in as well as gold. But the gold was a byproduct.
An opportunist. Yeah.
And then we found our first diamond. It was very exciting.
I bet.
We saw it. What happens, you suck the gravel up with this massive, great 8-inch pipe, and then you process it on the dredge, and it goes down to a smaller amount of concentrate. And then you take the concentrate and wash it by hand. And the gold, the fine gold flows through the sieve, and then you're left with the diamonds and the gravel in the sieve, which is 1 millimeter wire mesh, but in the wooden band, like a flour mill thing. And that's when they pick the diamonds out. They shake it by hand. They put it in water and they shake it by hand, and you can see the heavier concentrates gravitating to the centre. And the diamonds are quite heavy, heavier than the gravel. So they're in the centre of the black ring of stones that the gravel surrounds it. So you just pick the diamond out of the centre.
There you go.
And we saw it glinting there in the sunlight, flashing away when the sun caught it, and we saw it for our first diamond. It's fascinating.
It's fascinating. So how did this then lead you on to, is it starting a chartering company out in Africa as well?
Yeah, that was some 12 years later.
Oh, really? Oh, right.
When the Civil War started in Lebanon in the 1993, the government closed the roads because of rebels who originally started on the Liberian border, and they came in to try and get to the diamond areas in the Eastern Province where I was mining.
Right.
And then they got quite a lot of territory, and when they caught cars on the road, they'd stop the cars, lock the people inside, and set them on fire with petrol. Because they didn't want people going there. They wanted to take the diamonds themselves.
Jesus.
So all the main roads were closed. So you've got the diamond dealers up country who've got their diamonds. They couldn't bring them down by road, and there's no other. You can't walk 200 miles through jungle. There's no other way to get them down. So I thought the obvious thing to do here is open an air bridge. At that time, the Soviet Union was collapsing, and you could go there and you could buy anything. You could buy an H-bomb if you wanted to. And so I had to make some contacts out there. So I don't know how I got the contacts now, but I found a contact in Hungary, and they worked out of an aerodrome just outside Budapest called Esztergom. And I arranged with them, through their contacts, that we would go into Belarus and buy some Antonovs, or a Antonov, to go down there and start an air bridge in Sierra Leone. So I then went to Esztergom, and I got converted onto this Antonov AN2. And then we went to Belarus, and I actually bought two there. I thought I'll buy two when I'm here, not one, a spare one. So I bought two Antonovs, which I then flew down with the Russian crew to Sierra Leone. And the Antonov, it took 6 days, no, it was, I think 7 days. We arrived on the 7th day to get there from Esztergom, from Hungary, to Sierra Leone, because you're looking at 3,000 miles at 94 knots. It's like 7 days journey.
Yeah. Jesus.
And then we had to find somewhere to land in the Sahara to get fuel, which again was a drama in itself, which I won't go into because we weren't supposed to be there. But it was a restricted area, so I declared an emergency, and they had to let me land then, and I picked up fuel at the same time.
Christ.
Anyway, but I remember we stopped in Mauritania en route. What a terrible place that is! God, dear, oh dear. It's right in the middle of the Sahara there, and you've got this sort of grey-coloured sand, and it blows into the town in the streets here in the night, if the wind's up, and you've got soldiers and vehicles and shovels shoveling up the sand every morning, taking it back and dumping it in the desert. Terrible place. And the hotel we stayed at there, they'd only been built for a year, called the Marhaba Hotel, which in Arabic means the welcome hotel. And we checked in there, and it only been built a year, and there was this swimming pool in the centre of the hotel, surrounded by glass, and it looked like the grass was misty or hazy. It wasn't clean. When I looked closer, it's full of mosquitoes. It's thick with mosquitoes, like a mist.
Oof.
And apparently they hadn't. When the pool had been filled a year before, nobody changed the water. It was ridden with mosquitoes. And then they took us to the bedrooms, and all the doors had been kicked in. There were no locks on the doors. You know, and here I am, travelling with money. Because you had to take money for fuel en route. You couldn't pay with no credit cards in those days. You couldn't give checks to fuel stations in Africa or anywhere else. So you had to go with a lot of cash. You had to pay landing fees and all sorts of fees. I remember I put furniture up against the door of the hotel at night. I had a long Rambo type knife, which I put under my pillow and went to sleep. Anyway, but it was an interesting journey, and flying down across that Sahara, that was a story in itself. It was an adventure. We were flying at 6,000 feet for 2 days, and it was plus 40 degrees in the cabin, and the oil temperature gauge was flickering between the green and the red all the way. And I was there with the two crew, the two Russians, and we stared at this instrument the whole journey, willing this needle to go back into the green.
God, it's terrifying.
We lost an engine, then we went down the desert, and a chance you'd never be found.
Oh yeah, completely.
Because Mark Thatcher got lost, if you remember, when he went on that rally. And it took them a long while to find him, and that was on the roads, or such as they were, and they knew the route. But we were just flying line of sight, basically.
It's insane.
No roads, we saw nothing for 2,000 miles when we stopped at night. Just endless sand, nothing green, nothing. And also we had a problem crossing the Atlas Mountains. They go up to 10,000 feet in southern Morocco. And we were so heavily laden with stuff on board, the aeroplane spares and stuff, we had spare props and all sorts, that we couldn't get above the mountains. So I had to find a path through the Atlas Mountains to get to the Sahara.
And you did that by?
Oh, just by looking, basically.
Yes, see what's in front of you. Yeah.
So, it's quite a story.
So obviously you've got a long history with Africa, which is actually still continuing today with hovercraft ambitions.
Well, you remember earlier when I told you that when I first went to Sierra Leone, I got this ferry across, the car ferry.
Yeah.
Which took about an hour, a disgusting ferry. And the idea is to, I've been on it for some time now. I don't know whether it'll work or not yet, but we'll have to see. Buy a large British hovercraft with 130 odd seats and have it shipped, because you can't sail it there, obviously, a hovercraft is a short distance vehicle. Have it shipped to Sierra Leone and start a water bridge from the airport to the mainland. Instead of taking an hour on a ferry, then you've got to drive to the ferry, which is another half an hour, and load up, which is another hour. It's about a 3-hour journey just to do 10 miles. And they can do it in 25 minutes on a hovercraft, door to door, and land on the beach. It's the obvious thing to do.
Yeah, because you were saying about how, because if you wanted to do it with ships or boats, the infrastructure.
Well, then you've got to have docking facilities.
Yeah.
And there's already small boats plying backwards and forwards. Yeah. So it would just be another boat service. But with a hovercraft, it's a unique vehicle. You've got a USP. You can go from beach to beach. Instead of 3 hours, you can do it in 25 minutes.
Yeah.
When you come on a long flight to Sierra Leone, maybe 12 hours, depending which route you take, you don't want to spend 3 hours stuck on a ferry. No. You can do it in 25 minutes.
And of course you land on the beach.
And you land right on the beach, by the hotel.
You don't need infrastructure or massive infrastructure to make it work.
And again, just a short ride from the airport to the beach.
Yeah.
And we supply air-conditioned buses for that anyway, so that's the idea.
Yeah.
But it wants a bit of putting together.
I'm sure.
And of course, its finances is always a problem, whatever you do.
It is. Well, Roger, you've got obviously these books here that we could talk for the rest of the day, I'm sure. But these books obviously got more and more stories in here. I've read the first one about predominantly your racing career, but you've also got this one, Roger's Run.
Right. Well, this is the later one. You haven't seen it actually. That's the 4th edition.
I see.
It's very similar to yours, but it's got some more pages and pictures in.
Yep, we can hold that up there. I'll have that on the screen anyway.
That covers my 10-year motor racing career.
Yeah, and it's got some lovely diagrams. Of course, I've got to open it up on the Les Leston Protex overalls there. Yeah, incredible diagrams of the Costin Nathan, and going into detail about all the other racing exploits. So yeah, I've thoroughly enjoed reading it.
I'm glad you did. It's got some very good pictures in it.
Yeah.
And this is the second book, which is a hardback book.
Yeah.
Which covers the period after motor racing, up to date, basically.
I mean, this is even crazier, really. The life you led out there, even more outlandish. I've read many a story about motor racing careers and stuff. I'm fascinated by all of them, but you don't get many who've done this.
Yeah, it is a bit different, I must admit.
Yeah.
Don't forget the story about the nuns, the Italian nuns.
Oh, of course, yes. You've met the Pope.
No, I didn't meet the Pope, the nuns did.
The nuns met the Pope.
The nuns were held captive by the rebels, and I was approached by the Italian government to help get these nuns released with my airline services.
So you rescued a bunch of nuns once.
So we were able to get the nuns rescued, unharmed, unmolested, and they were later invited to the Vatican and met with the Pope.
And how did you say why were they in captive?
Well, the rebels took them for hostage.
Hostage.
So I mean, although we were involved in the mechanics of it, we didn't actually money was. I would assume money was transferred at some point, but we weren't party to that.
Still waiting for the invitation to meet the Pope for thanks.
Well, it's a different Pope now. He doesn't know me.
That's brilliant. Well, Roger, thank you very much for talking to us. It's been fascinating, and yeah, I wish you luck with the hovercraft project. And yeah, it's been brilliant.
Well, thank you, Ollie. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and it's always good to talk to somebody who understands what this is all about. And clearly, you've got a good insight into what I've been discussing or telling you about. So I'm not wasting my time. I'm glad.
That's good to hear. Yeah, and I hope people enjoy it. I'm sure they will.
I certainly hope they do, and I hope they buy plenty of books.
Yeah, you can get that on the website, the Roger Nathan website.
RogerNathanBooks.co.uk, and they can get signed copies too for a little bit extra.
Oh, ideal. Perfect Christmas present.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any time of year.
Yeah, anytime.
Let's not restrict our services.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.